Presidency heads to Texas.
We're like a garbage can for the world. That's what's happened.
The President of the United States should be someone who elevates.
Vice President Harris taking the stage tonight for a massive rally in Houston with Beyonce, a native of Houston, joining her. Harris taking on the state's strict abortion ban as former President Donald Trump is in Austin, focusing on immigration after calling the U.S., quote, a garbage can for the world. Why the reliably red state of Texas is suddenly in play this cycle. Plus,
the cramps were unbearable.
McDonald's deadly E. coli outbreak expanding. The CDC now reporting at least 75 people sickened across 13 states. The case is linked to those slivered onions used in the quarter pounders. And
Молодець, брат, все буде добре. Все буде добре. Ми всі хочемо, щоб ти повернувся додому скоріше. Молодець.
troops on both sides are dying by the dozens every day as Russia's war in Ukraine rages on. Vladimir Putin saying in no uncertain terms he would not, quote, make any concessions to end the conflict. We are on the ground for a look at the human cost of the war day after day. Good evening. I'm Phil Lipoff in tonight for Lindsay Davis. Thanks so much for streaming with us. We are following those stories and so much more tonight, including 24 hours after the district attorney called for their release, Eric and Lyle Menendez. Now cautiously optimistic, we are told that a judge will grant it for them parole after serving 35 years behind bars for murdering their parents. Plus, the new reports of Chinese hackers attempting to interfere in the U.S. election by targeting the candidates, who and why. And it's the fight for the pennant kicking off tonight with baseball's two most successful teams going at it for the first time in decades, the World Series. The Yanks and Dodgers, we're going to go by the numbers. But we are going to begin tonight with the fast-moving developments in the race for the White House. With just 11 days to go, the race is a virtual dead heat. A new poll just out from the New York Times and Siena College, the last one before the election, showing the race has tightened, each candidate now with 48% among likely voters. The former president leaning into his signature issue in Texas today, immigration, after saying that undocumented immigrants have made America, quote, like a garbage can for the world. Vice President Harris also in Texas tonight, calling those words another example of how the former president belittles the country, quote, telling the world that somehow the United States of America is trash. And tonight, Trump also facing a new accusation of sexual misconduct from a woman who says she was introduced to him by Jeffrey Epstein, the Trump campaign calling it unequivocally false. Our team is standing by. Mary Bruce is with the Harris campaign, but we begin with ABC's Rachel Scott.
Tonight, Vice President Kamala Harris calling out Donald Trump after he declared the influx of undocumented immigrants has made America, quote, a garbage can.
We're a dumping ground. We're like a garbage can for the world. That's what's happened. That's what's happened to her. We're like a garbage can.
Tonight, Harris was blunt.
I also do want to address the comment that Donald Trump made about America being the trash can of the world, whatever he said, something along those lines. You know, it's just another example of how he really belittles our country. This is someone who is a former president of the United States, who has a bully pulpit. And this is how he uses it to tell the rest of the world that somehow the United States of America is trash.
In the final days, Trump leaning into his signature issue of the border.
Under the Trump administration, we will end this migrant invasion and we will deport every last criminal alien targeting our daughters and our children, our families, other people's families. They're going to be gone. They're going to be gone fast.
But border apprehensions are actually down since the Biden administration took new executive action.
We have dealt with it such that, to your point, we now, as of today, as of our visit, have lower undocumented immigrants and illegal immigration than Trump when he left office.
And Harris has vowed to sign a bipartisan border security bill that Trump tanked because he wanted to run on the issue.
It would have done a lot of good. Donald Trump got wind of the bill and told them, don't put it forward. He killed the bill because he'd prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem.
It comes as Trump faces new accusations of sexual misconduct. Former model Stacey Williams says she was brought to Trump Tower in 1993 by businessman Jeffrey Epstein, who years later was accused of sex trafficking. She says Trump started groping her with Epstein standing right there.
He pulls me into him, and then, but talking with Jeffrey, they're looking at each other, and then it goes from being like sort of just me in his grasp to then his hands moving, and his hands would touch the sides of my breasts, not the front, but the sides of my breasts, my waist, and then slid down to my butt, and just kept kind of running up and down my body while the two of them were carrying on a conversation.
Williams says she was shocked and froze. Shortly after the encounter, she says she received this Mar-a-Lago postcard from Trump reading, "You're home away from home. Love, Donald." The Trump campaign in a statement saying the claims, quote, 2 weeks before the election are unequivocally false.
Rachel Scott joins us now. Rachel, good to have you here. Trump making every effort to appeal to young men in particular, appearing on a very popular podcast.
Yeah, this is an extremely popular podcast. Joe Rogan has millions of followers online. So the former president sat down for a very long interview with Joe Rogan. And this is an all-out appeal to those very young male voters. And then he's going to leave behind the battleground states after campaign stops in Michigan and Pennsylvania. He's going to come right here to New York City for a rally at Madison Square Garden on Sunday night, where he's expected to start making his closing arguments. We have just 11 days to go, Phil.
Seems like more than that, doesn't it, at times? All right, Rachel Scott, thank you so much. Meantime, Vice President Harris is in Houston tonight, leaning into a core issue of her campaign, women's reproductive rights, with the help of superstar Beyonce. Texas has a near total abortion ban, an issue that has galvanized women voters. Polls showing gender is a growing divide in this election. ABC's Mary Bruce in Houston for us.
Tonight, thousands of people lining up in Houston, where Vice President Kamala Harris will be joined by superstar Beyonce to focus on women's reproductive rights, a core issue of her campaign.
This is not just a political debate. This is not just some theoretical concept. Real harm has occurred in our country. A real suffering has occurred. People have died. This is among the most critical issues that the American people will address when they vote for who will be the next president of the United States.
Texas is not a battleground, but Harris argues it is ground zero for the fight for reproductive rights, that the state's near total abortion ban reflects the damage done after Donald Trump appointed 3 of the Supreme Court justices who overturned Roe v. Wade, something Trump brags about. Harris and her campaign highlighting the story of a Texas woman named Andrea in a searing new campaign ad.
Her blanket.
Andrea suffered a life-threatening infection when Texas law prevented her from getting proper treatment after she miscarried. Now she and her husband may no longer be able to have children.
Do you believe in punishment for abortion?
There has to be some form of punishment.
For the woman?
Yeah, there has to be some form. Women will be happy, healthy, confident, and free. You will no longer be abandoned, lonely, or scared. You will no longer have anxiety. You will be protected, and I will be your protector.
Harris counting on this issue to win support among women. Polls show a significant gender divide in this race. A New York Times Siena poll shows Harris leads Trump by 12 points among women. Trump leads Harris by 14 points among men. Trump has been making an all-out push for male voters with his campaign focus and his surrogates. Tucker Carlson raising eyebrows recently with how he described Trump if reelected, like an angry dad coming home to punish his children.
Dad is pissed. He's not vengeful. He loves his children. Disobedient as they may be, he loves them because they're his children. They live in his house. But he's very disappointed in their behavior, and he's gonna have to let them know. And when Dad gets home, you know what he says? You've been a bad girl. You've been a bad little girl, and you're getting a vigorous spanking right now.
A stark contrast from Harris's message to women that in this election, their very freedom is at stake.
Ours is a fight for the future, and it is a fight for freedom. For freedom, like the fundamental freedom of a woman to make decisions about her own body and not have her government tell her what to do.
And Mary joins us now. Mary, talk about the next few days ahead for Harris.
Well, with the few days that are left, Phil, she's going to be crisscrossing those key battleground states, continuing to get out there and leaning on her biggest, most powerful, most star-studded supporters out there. Tomorrow, she's going to be out in Michigan with Michelle Obama, the first time that the two of them have been together out on the trail, the first time Michelle Obama has been out on the trail for Kamala Harris. Then on Sunday, she's back in the key must-win state of Pennsylvania. And then, of course, we know next Tuesday, 1 week out from Election Day, she's going to be giving that major address. It's being billed as her closing argument, speaking in Washington at the exact same site where Donald Trump addressed his supporters on January 6th. Phil?
It's going to be a long 11 days. Mary Bruce from Houston, Texas. Mary, thank you. Investigators are working to determine if Chinese hackers accessed cell phones used by former President Trump and his running mate, J.D. Vance. The group believed to be behind the hack attack, Salt Typhoon is the name, is said to have breached a number of major carriers, including Verizon and AT&T. Sources say the hackers went after high-profile customers from the government and business worlds. The sources tell us the federal government is trying to determine if the Chinese were able to access phone and text logs or even read text messages and emails. President Biden today made a formal and emotional apology to Native Americans for the system of government-run boarding schools that forced generations of Native children from their families and their tribes.
One of the most horrific chapters in American history. We should be ashamed. A chapter that most Americans don't know about.
For more than 150 years, until 1969, more than 18,000 children were taken away to assimilate them into white culture. Many were abused, and estimated 1,000 are estimated to have died. The president calling it, as you heard, one of the most horrific chapters in American history. The billionaire newspaper owners of the Washington Post and the LA Times blocked their paper's endorsements of Kamala Harris for president, and now several employees of both papers are resigning in protest. The Washington Post Guild says they were, quote, deeply concerned, claiming Jeff Bezos chose not to publish their endorsement, though it had already been written. It comes as two LA Times editorial board members resigned after the paper's owner blocked their endorsement. Editorial's editor, Mariel Garza, who resigned in protest, spoke to the Columbia Journalism Review, saying she recognized the owner has the final say, but refused to stay silent, saying, quote, Donald Trump has demonstrated such hostility toward principles that are central to journalism. Next tonight to Elon Musk and Vladimir Putin. The Wall Street Journal reporting the two have been in regular contact multiple times, what they've reportedly been discussing. And despite questions from federal authorities, Musk continues to give away million-dollar checks to voters trying to help former President Trump's campaign. Here's Martha Raddatz.
Tonight, the director of NASA, Bill Nelson, calling for an investigation into the startling Wall Street Journal report alleging regular communications between billionaire Elon Musk and Russian President Vladimir Putin. According to the Journal, the discussions have been ongoing since 2022, focusing on personal topics, business, and geopolitical tensions. At one point, says the Journal, Musk was asked by Putin not to activate his satellite service over Taiwan as a favor to China's President Xi Jinping. It is unknown whether Musk agreed. Musk has billions of dollars of contracts with the federal government.
We have liftoff.
The Pentagon using his SpaceX rockets to launch satellites, and NASA using SpaceX to shuttle its astronauts to the International Space Station.
Come on up here, Elon.
And Musk has been a fervent supporter of Donald Trump, a regular on the campaign trail in the battleground state of Pennsylvania. Now giving out million-dollar checks to registered voters who sign his petition. Federal authorities have questioned whether it's lawful.
Our thanks to Martha Raddatz. The deadly E. coli outbreak linked to McDonald's is expanding tonight. The CDC now reporting cases in 3 more states, bringing the total to 13. At least 75 people have gotten sick and 1 has died. Now, health officials are concerned about the danger from this particular E. coli strain. ABC's Mola Lenghi is in Colorado tonight.
Tonight, the CDC says they've confirmed 75 cases of E. coli linked to McDonald's. The outbreak spreading to 13 states. While the cause of the outbreak has not been definitely determined, federal regulators are looking at raw, slivered onions served on their quarter pounders as the likely source. Health officials are particularly concerned about this strain of E. coli because it can cause a life-threatening condition called hemolytic uremic syndrome, which can cause kidney failure. It's mostly common in young children.
The cramps were unbearable.
Clarissa DeBach got sick, but is thankful her 2-year-old son, who got some of her fries, didn't get a bite of her burger.
It's just really scary to think if he would have, by chance gotten a bite of it or touched it and then touched his mouth.
McDonald's supplier of the onions, Taylor Farms, says they recalled them out of an abundance of caution, and McDonald's has pulled the quarter pounder off the menu entirely in 900 restaurants in affected areas. They've also ceased doing business with Taylor Farms indefinitely. As a precaution, Burger King, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, and KFC have all pulled onions off their menus.
Mola joins us now from Denver. Mola, what can we expect as we continue to hear about new cases?
Well, Phil, more cases will likely be reported to the CDC by people who got sick weeks ago. But, because of actions taken by McDonald's and Taylor Farms, at least over the last few days, the CDC says they believe, at least at this point, the ongoing risk to the public is low, Phil.
All right, Mola Lenghi from Denver. Mola, thank you. Tonight, 24 hours after the L.A. District Attorney recommended that a judge re-sentence the Menendez brothers, their lawyer says they are cautiously optimistic. Chief National Correspondent Matt Gutman in Los Angeles.
After 35 years in prison for the shotgun murders of their parents, the fate of the Menendez brothers is now in the hands of a judge who will decide if they should be re-sentenced and eligible for parole. Their attorney says Eric and Lyle are hopeful.
I think they're cautiously optimistic that they can see some real relief at this point.
But even if the judge supports the DA's new push for parole, the Department of Corrections says it could be 6 months before the case goes to the parole board. The district attorney telling us he weighed multiple factors, including the brothers' sexual abuse by their father and their transformation in prison.
Was there one piece of evidence that came to light that got you and was one of the deciding factors in your decision?
Well, there were many, right? I mean, look, they were in prison for 35 years and they had no hopes of ever getting out. And yet they went on to not only do things to better themselves, but they spent a lot of time working and helping other prisoners.
Matt joins us now from Los Angeles. Matt, could be quite a while before the brothers see freedom, if they see freedom. So give us more on this timeline.
So let's break down the math. It could be maybe a month, 45 days before a judge actually makes the ruling on the DA's recommendation for immediate parole. Then it goes before a parole board. That could take another 6 months, they say. Then it goes before Governor Gavin Newsom. That could be an additional 5 months. So we're looking about a year before they could possibly be released. But there is a second track for the release with a hearing scheduled for late November. That one examines the sexual abuse that they underwent as children. Phil.
All right. Matt Gutman from Los Angeles. Matt, thank you. Phil Lesh, bassist and founding member of the Grateful Dead, has died at the age of 84. Hailed for his experimental bass work, Lesh also sang harmony and occasionally lead vocals. He wrote some of the band's most well-known songs like Dark Star and Box of Rain. His death was announced on Instagram with no further information provided. Brooklyn-born music producer DJ Clark Kent has died at 58 years of age from colon cancer. The DJ got his start in the 80s producing Junior Mafia and the Notorious B.I.G.'s Players Anthem, which was largely credited with introducing Lil' Kim's talent to the world. Kent went on to produce Jay-Z, Kanye West, and Lil Pump. His family released a statement saying they are grateful for everyone's love, support, and prayers. There is still much more to get to here tonight on Prime. A teen's quick thinking helps police catch a man who tried to lure her into his car. But next, the war in Ukraine has been raging for more than 2 years now. Could the next president of the United States change the course of the conflict? We are on the ground for a look at the human toll of the war.
ABC Election Night.
Are you ready to make your voices heard?
We will soon be a great nation again.
America, we are not going back. We fight for the future.
Our country will be greater than ever before.
Who will be your next president?
When we fight, we win.
We will make America great again.
Election night, this is where America turns for answers. ABC Election Night Live.
A Hollywood studio want us to make a movie of our podcast.
It's a fabulous cast.
Action. I'm nervous playing you. The fearlessness, the complexity.
Oh, stop. Unless you had more to say.
I don't need an algorithm to tell me that this is box office gold.
Only Murders in the Building, streaming on Hulu and for bundle subscribers on Disney+.
Hi, my name is Patrice. I am a totally cool person with a disability. Patrice always sees the best side of life. I just looked at her and I said, would you like to be my wife?
If you get married and you're collecting a Social Security benefit, your benefit will be cut.
I don't take anything for granted.
I don't see what anyone can see in anyone.
They're never gonna stop us from loving each other.
3, 2, 1.
It's a 24/7 life together.
It's not about the fear or the risk. It's about the love of flying. 3, 2, 1.
Did you kill Mary Yoder?
Sorry. No, I did not kill Mary Yoder.
This is a mystery. How did she die? They begin to do this autopsy.
It's just screaming, toxin, toxin, toxin.
Did somebody intentionally do this to her?
When the tests came back, I thought, yeah, holy, are you kidding me?
My garden club is very divided. People think she's innocent. I think she's guilty.
Never heard of a case like this. Maybe a thriller.
I'm not buying this Little Miss Innocent game.
Little Miss Innocent, passion, poison, prison.
I know it wasn't me. Sorry. So, if it wasn't me, who was it?
Only on Hulu.
Welcome back. It has been nearly 1,000 days since Russia invaded Ukraine, kicking off a war that has seen countless military and civilian deaths. This week, we learned North Korea sent troops to Russia to train for potentially joining their efforts in that war, just weeks after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky journeyed to the U.S. to request additional support. But it's the human lives caught in the middle coming more into focus as Vladimir Putin makes it very clear he will not accept any concessions to end the war. Our Ian Panel reports from Ukraine.
Over 2.5 years of war, hundreds of thousands of casualties, soldiers and civilians. And even now, the Russian army is still advancing, closing in on its next target, Pokrovsk, a strategic hub in the Donbass in the east of the country, once far from the front lines and home to 60,000 Ukrainians. But now the whirlwind of war has come to Pokrovsk, and those caught in its path are racing to get out while they still can. Families like Anne, a 12-year-old son, Vladislav, and 17-year-old daughter, Valeria. They tell us it's too dangerous and they're too afraid to stay any longer. It's a thought no child should have to ponder, a reality no family should endure.
I just wonder, do you feel anger or sadness or maybe both?
Thousands have passed through to this shelter. Here, families are fed with kindness and some warm stew. Many are old and frail. They've filled this old theatre with cots. It passes for home while they wait in limbo. Loneliness stalks this land, and many are alone. Like Oleg, a bus driver from Pokrovsk.
Hi, Oleg. How are you doing?
Як справи?
Добре?
Живый.
Yeah.
Потому что когда был удар ракеты в 100 метрах от моего дома, короче, там, ну, остались только стены целые. А я был внутри, спал. И это я даже не знаю, в какой рубашке надо было родиться, чтобы сидеть не поломанным, не побитым и живым.
With no means to pay for housing, Oleg, like so many here, is forced to head west.
За россиян я скажу. Я их всех ненавижу. Казалось бы, да, ненавидеть надо только кремлевских утех. Вы поняли, кого? Нет, ненавижу всех. Потому что за рычагами танков сидит не Путин и не Шойгу. Сидят простые россияне. Поэтому у них вина коллективная.
Oleg is now one of more than 3.5 million people displaced inside Ukraine. More than 6 million more remain abroad. But for many, there's no escaping this war. Civilians from once peaceful places like Pokrovsk and soldiers from the front arrive here every day.
Ситуація вкрай важка. Ворог масивно атакує бомбами, ракетами. І, на жаль, поранених з кожним днем стає більше і більше.
Dr. Sergei Ryzhenko is the chief doctor here.
How are you coping? I think I saw you over a year ago. If you don't mind me saying, you look tired.
І всі вже просто втомилися від цього потоку поранених героїв і пораненого цивільного населення, якому треба допомагати. Все є, але вже сил не вистачає, щоб все це зробити вчасно.
Since the war began, the 2,500 staff members here have worked around the clock, day in, day out, to save lives. Some days they perform 100 trauma surgeries, and more than 19 tons of blood have been used for transfusion.
Only soldiers.
Only soldiers,
yeah. Artillery, missiles, very, very, very serious, very serious.
What the doctor's saying is that it's all soldiers here, but one's been wounded by rockets, one by missiles, other wounded by artillery. He said every single bed in this hospital is now full. Shrapnel wounds.
Shrapnel, yes. Молодець, брат. Все буде добре. Все буде добре. Ми всі хочемо, щоб ти повернувся додому скоріше. Молодець.
So he's lost the lower part of his leg, below the knee.
Sergei can remember the moment his life changed forever. A Russian drone dropped 3 bombs on his position on the Eastern Front.
Він ще й повоюємо.
The bodies here are broken, but incredibly, the spirit is strong.
Sergei, can I ask you, you just said that you, when you recover, and you'll have a prosthetic leg, that you want to go back and fight. Why?
А у нас нема другого виходу. Ми захищаємо свою батьківщину. Це наша рідна земля. Ворог прийшов на нашу землю. Ми її захищаємо.
A haunting plot of land outside the city of Dnipro is the final resting place for fallen soldiers. The unimaginable cost of Russia's invasion is visibly mounting. The losses and the suffering in this war are absolutely staggering. It's over a year since I was last in this military graveyard, and it's just grown exponentially. People are exhausted by all the fighting and all the dying. And the CIA just came out with a report saying that Ukraine now has the lowest birth rate and the highest death rate of anywhere in the world. Sunday evening, supper time, in the Saltivka neighborhood outside Kharkiv. The Borovsky family were getting ready for dinner in their apartment when a Russian bomb hit.
И произошел бум большой. Ну и потом град из стекол всех посыпало, всех порезало. Ну, старший кое-как с комнаты вышел, младшая сидела на диване, держала вот так вот ушки. Ну, подхватил младшую и в коридор. Жена с кухни. Ее приводила там дверями, рамами, оконными там. Хорошо, ну, доползла тоже до коридора.
In the immediate aftermath, they scrambled to find each other and were taken by ambulance to Kharkiv Regional Children's Hospital. The bomb left them with wounds that will heal in time, but the psychological scars cut much deeper.
How do you cope living in this situation?
Это никак нельзя выдержать, потому что это постоянный стресс, это постоянные нервы. Даже бывает, если просто день спокойный и просто будет тревога, но ты не слышишь взрыва, у тебя уже психика нарушенная.
Все, что было в один момент раз, и ничего не стало. Как-то так. Секунда дела, моргнул, бам, все.
But right now, bam, 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 when the people
And few
walk in,
feel or fear their time may be running out more than the first responders, also on the front lines of this war.
If you could die any
you can die any moment. If you're lucky, you're lucky. If you're not lucky, you're not lucky. So.
Roman is a fire chief in Kharkiv. We first met him 2 years ago.
We need to extinguish it. Let's go one floor more.
Larger than life and full of fighting spirit then, today he too is a changed man.
How are you, honestly?
Honestly, so. Tired, exhausted. This war, it's hard for everybody. I'm pretty sure that our warriors much more exhausted than me, but also work, like living without family, a lot of calls, a lot of paperwork, a lot of everything, and also not having understanding what's next, what will be later, what kind of plans I need to have for the future, for my family, for myself. That's why hard, but we are strong and trying to do all the best.
It's that strength that keeps this country going.
Oh wow, there's glass all over the floor, so be careful.
The same resilience that brings Ivan back to his home.
Матвей, шум, кровь, пыль, истерика.
Yeah.
Я не знаю, что больше сказать. У меня сейчас чуть-чуть воспоминания немножко.
Are you okay?
Okay.
Not really.
In Ukraine, this is what surviving looks like. On the surface, the little laughs from Ukraine's next generation seem to tell a different story. But there's nothing normal about childhood here. Innocence is a thing of the past, when children must go to school underground just to protect them from the bombs. The kids wear masks of happiness that cover the reality of how hard life truly is for them.
Who likes maths?
Діти, хто любить математику? Yes.
And do the kids talk? Do they raise this in conversation? Do they talk about the war?
They do. Of course they do.
In what way do they talk about it?
The kids always talk when something happened, like the day before.
Like yesterday there was...
Yes, like for example, there was a big attack, or maybe someone who they know got hurt, God forbid. They always ask each other. It's a bit funny and also extremely sad when I hear, did you hear this? Oh, I heard like 6 explosions last night, or I heard a shaheed during the night.
Right, that drone. Yeah.
Kids are comparing how many shaheeds each one of them heard during the night. I never thought I would experience something like this in my lifetime, but here I am.
Yeah.
So many lives here have been forever altered by this war. Vladislav and Valeria join their mum and many others as they head to the west, where they'll be in relative safety, never knowing when they'll be allowed back home. It's incredible that over 2.5 years since Russia started this phase of the war, that people are still dying and fleeing, increasingly out of sight and out of mind. As a difficult winter nears, mourners grieve yet one more fallen soldier, 32-year-old Anton Samporsky. The son of Ukraine's chief rabbi leaves behind his wife and a newborn daughter. It seems only the dead get to rest in peace in Ukraine.
We're going to interrupt that report now for some breaking news. Iranian state TV is now reporting several strong explosions in Iran. Sources telling ABC News that this is the beginning of Israel's retaliation against Iran. This comes on the heels of that Iranian missile barrage into Israel. Most of those missiles intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome defense system. Iran's attack came in part in response to Israel's killing of Hezbollah's longtime leader, Hassan Nasrallah, in Lebanon. And just last week, Israel forces killed the leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar. Chief Global Affairs correspondent Martha Raddatz joins us now. And Martha, what are your sources telling you? We have been waiting for this to happen. We just did not know when it was going to happen, but it appears it is happening tonight.
It sure does. And in fact, Phil, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, have now put out a statement saying in response to months of continuous attacks from the regime in Iran against the state of Israel, right now, the Israeli Defense Forces are conducting precise strikes on military targets in Iran. Now, I think saying they are military targets is exactly what the United States wanted them to leave this to. They did not want them to attack nuclear forces. They did, or nuclear sites rather. They did not want them to attack oil infrastructure. And it looks like Israel got the message on that. We don't know how extensive the bombing is, but they do say they were precise strikes. Again, there are some explosions reported in Tehran, but those clearly could be military strikes as well. The IDF goes on to say the regime in Iran and its proxies in the region have been relentlessly attacking Israel since October 7th on 7 fronts, including direct attacks from Iranian soil. As you mentioned, Phil, just about 3 weeks ago, Iran fired that barrage of missiles toward Israel. That was a night where their defense systems did very well, but did not stop them all. And in fact, one of those missiles landed very near one of the Israeli spy facilities. And Israel goes on to say, like every other sovereign country in the world, the state of Israel has the right and the duty to respond. Our defensive and offensive capabilities are fully mobilized. So I think this could go on for several hours, but again, they have said quite clearly they are making precision strikes against military targets. There are, of course, numerous military targets throughout Iran. A U.S. official I spoke to earlier this evening said if they go big, and at the time the official was not sure exactly how big this would be, it will be harder for Iran not to strike back. And that's what the U.S. is watching very carefully. The U.S. is not involved in this action in any way, but of course, if Iran strikes back, the U.S. will help defend Israel. Phil?
Yeah, and Martha, as we're talking about what happened just a few weeks ago in these ballistic missiles that were fired, there was also a barrage fired back in April. That was Iran's response to Israel hitting an embassy in Syria and killing 3 IRGC commanders. This is now a back and forth. The IDF said on 7 fronts now, but this is what really the world, the UN, Israel has been, America has been concerned with, a wider conflict in this area. And all these proxies from Iran have been involved. And now it looks like Iran directly is involved with Israel.
Exactly, Phil. And they have been before, as you said, many months ago. That did not escalate it particularly. It certainly was tamped down for a while after that. But this back and forth keeps continuing. But the U.S. has had an intense diplomatic effort with Benjamin Netanyahu, trying to talk him into keeping this within certain limits and going after just military targets. Now, if those are massive military targets, that's something else altogether. But as of right now, it does not look, according to their language, which we don't know how precise that language is, that they have not gone after oil infrastructure, which the U.S. and the rest of the world was very worried about, or those nuclear facilities. They would likely, if they did real damage to those nuclear facilities, would have needed some help from the U.S., but they could have done partial damage to some of those nuclear facilities and set back the nuclear program that they're involved with now by months or weeks, but they couldn't have really taken it out I think most analysts will tell you, unless they had the help of the U.S., and they did not have the help of the U.S. And we're talking about refuelers so their planes could fly longer. We're talking about bigger bombs. That doesn't appear to have happened.
Martha, let's take a step back for just 1 second. Few people have covered this region like you. You have been there countless times just within the last couple of years, but you've been covering this part of the world for decades. What is the difference now than in prior conflicts? Is this the worst we've seen this region, the most tense we've seen this region?
Well, when you have Israel and Iran directly involved like that and firing on one another, and there's always room for miscalculation. I mean, surely Iran knows when they launch those missiles, those ballistic missiles, that most of them would be intercepted, and they were, because Iran is very well aware of how strong the defenses are in Israel, and particularly if the U.S. helps out as well. But yes, this is an escalation that nobody wanted to see go this far. But let's go back to October 7th. No one imagined that there would be such a horrific attack on the state of Israel. And from there, of course, the proxies were back and forth with Israel, and Israel is determined to make these wars end.
Yeah, it was October 8th that Hezbollah began to fire rockets into Israel. Hezbollah, of course, and Hamas, proxies for Israel. Martha, we know this is early on in this campaign, whatever it is going to be, and we know you're watching it and talking to your sources. We'll come back to you when you have more. Appreciate it.
You bet.
So the IDF just released this video statement about what they are calling precise strikes on military targets in Iran. Let's take a listen. All right, so we'll look at that in just 1 minute. I want to bring in ABC News contributor Mick Mulroy, who has served as Deputy Assistant Secretary and Defense for the Middle East. Mick, Israel has been warning that they could retaliate for Iran's targeting of Israel with missiles on October 1st. They have been saying they will do it at a time of their choosing. It seems tonight is that time. You listened to Martha's reporting. What are your first thoughts as this is just getting underway?
So, Phil, it does appear that this is the time. Perhaps they were waiting for the U.S. to fully get our THAAD missile system in place, which could be very important when it comes to any response by Iran. But it does sound like, as the IDF put out, that this was against military targets. That is clearly what the United States wanted to see. They didn't want to see nuclear facilities struck or energy infrastructure, which could have major impacts on the world economy. But military targets, as Martha said, are extensive, and some of them do reside in Tehran. So we're hearing initial reports there could be strikes in Tehran, the IRGC headquarters in Tehran. But of course, they're all over the country, and Israel has a lot of capabilities, both with air-launched ballistic missiles and cruise missiles, to really reach in and hit these locations.
Mick, in the past, Salvo, in April, like we saw a barrage heading toward, I think it was that time 300 or so drones. It was various projectiles fired at Israel, and they were virtually all taken down by the Iron Dome. I believe America shot some of them down, UK as well. It seems to me, just as an observer of this, with certainly no military experience, that each side is being particularly cautious in their response. I mean, it's taken Israel 3 weeks or so to begin this response. Do you expect, and I don't even know what a proportional response would be, but do you expect it to be precise and cautious this evening?
So from all the statements of the IDF leaders, the Minister of Defense, they sounded like they really wanted to make a substantial impact on Iran's capabilities. So they're probably, of course, going after a lot of the missile bases where the attacks on Israel come from. But it could be substantial, and it might be an immediate retaliation by Iran. There's no requirement, of course, that countries have to wait and pause. And I think that is something Israel's also taking in mind with waiting for the THAAD system of the U.S. to get in place. But this could get into a situation where we have a complete tick for tack. So it goes up the escalatory ladder very quickly, and that is what so many world leaders are concerned about. If this starts to be a free-for-all back and forth between Israel and Iran, that's where things can get out of control. We don't know. We'll have to see how they respond to these attacks. But like you said, we have to see how substantial these attacks were first.
Yeah, and as Martha just pointed out, the ability to have a miscalculation here and things to escalate is always the concern. Mick, stay with us while we watch this statement. We've now queued it up, a statement by Israel calling the strikes tonight precise and military targets. Let's listen.
In response to months of continuous attacks from the regime in Iran against the State of Israel, right now, the Israel Defense Forces is conducting precise strikes on military targets in Iran. The regime in Iran and its proxies in the region have been relentlessly attacking Israel since October 7th on 7 fronts, including direct attacks from Iranian soil. Like every other sovereign country in the world, the State of Israel has the right and the duty to respond. Our defensive and offensive capabilities are fully mobilized. We will do whatever necessary to defend the State of Israel and the people of Israel.
Yeah, that's a brief statement from Daniel Hagari, spokesperson for the IDF. Mick, I want to bring you back in. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in a statement earlier this month, and we'll quote it, when Iran is finally free, and that moment will come a lot sooner than people think, everything will be different. It's a pretty strong statement. I'm wondering if you think Netanyahu's regime is trying to bring about regime change in Iran.
So I'm sure they would like to see that. Certainly that's not ever done by airstrikes. But of course, he could be talking about leadership strikes. So we've seen Israel take out so many of the leaders of the Iranian proxy forces and IRGC leaders that are involved with them. And they've made statements that could indicate, and this might be one of them, that they intend to go after senior leadership in Iran during these strikes. Again, we'll have to see what happens at the end of that. But that is part of a military strike. The chain of command ends with the commander who's in charge of the military. So that would be considered a military strike, but obviously a substantial escalation if they go after leadership targets specifically.
You heard Martha report that the U.S. was concerned that Israel might attack some of the nuclear facilities there. We know Iran has been increasing its enrichment of uranium, especially since former President Trump pulled out of that nuclear deal that the West had made with Iran. Does Israel have the capability to strike those enrichment facilities? I mean, early indications are that has not happened so far this evening. Do they have the capabilities to really do damage there?
So that, Phil, they likely have the capabilities of striking them. The issue is how hard and how much damage it would actually do to the facility. Pretty much the United States is the only one that has munitions that are really substantial. They can penetrate deep into the ground before they detonate, and they're very large bombs. I don't think Israel has that capability. That's why so many people said this would essentially start all the issues that would come from striking the nuclear facilities without actually destroying them. So I think for that reason, and obviously the United States not participating in it, as Martha said, and not wanting to see it happen, I think it's unlikely to happen. But I don't think without the United States that it would be a full strike on a nuclear facility that ended their capabilities.
And Mick, you know the U.S. recently supplied Israel with more defensive missile systems, the THAAD system, as you referenced just a little while ago. What could draw the U.S. further into this conflict? We've seen, the U.S. shoot down some projectiles coming from Iran. That was in April. What could draw the U.S. further into this conflict now 11 days to the election?
So, of course, we deployed about 100 soldiers to go with that THAAD system, and they're in Israel. Of course, from the Iranian perspective, they might view them as a military target, and they might be targeted specifically. Hopefully, of course, we have all the defensive systems in place to block that, but there's nothing guaranteed that that's going to happen. So that could draw the U.S. directly in with any of our forces being part of any kind of casualties toward the base where they're currently located. The other, of course, is if Israel gets overwhelmed, and I don't think that's going to happen, between Iran, all the proxies in the region, to include the Houthis, Hezbollah, and the militias in Syria, the U.S. might get more involved from the air trying to mitigate the threats that are coming into Israel, which could include strikes on facilities in southern Lebanon if the IDF asked for it, and of course, if the president authorized it. It really depends on the level of response and retaliation by Iran and its proxies from what happens tonight. That's how the United States could get drawn further into this, but we're already well into this.
All right, Mick Mulroy, thank you so much. This is probably going to be a long night, so we appreciate you staying with us on this Friday night. Right now, I want to bring in ABC's Tom Soufi Burridge, who is in Israel for us tonight. Tom, this has been talked about for weeks. You've been reporting on this for weeks now, and it seems it is happening. What can you tell us about the build-up to this particular moment?
Well, I mean, clearly, the Israelis have been preparing for this moment for a while now, Phil. They've taken their time, haven't they? I mean, it hasn't come soon, as some officials after the attacks earlier this month on Israel had warned. But look, we've just had a statement from the IDF saying that they have been striking multiple targets in Iran, military targets. And we've also heard from another Israeli official just now confirming that energy and oil sites, Iranian oil and energy sites, are not in amongst the targets. So, what is looking like the case right now, according to all the sources we're hearing from, is that Israel has listened to that demand from the US. The US clearly was pressing Israel not to go after Iran's nuclear and oil sites. I mean, Iran's oil infrastructure is highly valuable to the regime. There were fears about what a strike on oil sites could do to global oil prices, of course, just before the US election. And there were also fears, obviously, about what kind of reprisal attack Iran would go for if Israel were to hit the most sensitive sites, i.e. its oil and its nuclear facilities. That doesn't seem to be the case tonight. We're getting reports from an Iranian news agency saying there are multiple explosions coming out of the Tehran area. We don't know the precise nature of the strikes, the precise targets at this stage, but Israeli officials are underlining that they have gone after military targets. The question right now, I think, is, how will Iran respond? I mean, it might be a bit premature to think about that, but I spoke to a former Israeli brigadier general the other day, and he was warning that he believed that Iran would strike back immediately. And that is the fear, that Iran could go for a very quick reprisal attack. It will depend on the scale and nature of the Israeli strikes. It will potentially, as the Iranian officials have indicated to some media outlets in the last 24, 48 hours, it could depend on how many fatalities there are in these strikes and what exact assets, how prized are the assets to the Iranian regime that Israel is hitting tonight. And that might be the calculus that the Iranian regime has to look at, and then we'll have to see how they respond.
Tom, as we continue our conversation, I want to take a live look at Israel's northeastern border with Lebanon. I know you've been doing reporting from up there since October 8th, and even before, obviously, but specifically since October 8th. Rockets have been fired across this border. Immediately, Hezbollah began to fire rockets after the attack by Hamas on Israel. We're just learning, Tom, from an Israeli official to ABC on record, and it says Israel's retaliatory targets do not include energy infrastructure or nuclear facilities. That is a really important piece of information, because we know from President Biden on down, and world leaders did not want Israel to target any kind of a nuclear infrastructure. I'm wondering, when you hear that, do you think this is going to be, and again, I don't know how to quantify this, but a measured response by Israel to that barrage of rockets we saw 3 weeks ago?
Well, it certainly looks like Israel has gone for some kind of measured response here. I mean, look, I think, I've read Prime Minister Netanyahu's recent autobiography, and we know for a number of years that he personally has wanted to go after Iran's nuclear program. He's wanted to take it back, degrade it. He's wanted to strike it. He has, under the Obama administration, been, lobbying the US to join him on a potential military strike against that. Now, if you look at where we are in the world today compared to back then, we're in a much more dangerous period where, Iran has struck Israel on 2 occasions. Back in April, with more than 300 drones and missiles, and then obviously at the beginning of the month with about 200 ballistic missiles. A completely unprecedented attack. Those were the 2 first attacks by Iran directly on Israeli soil. The second, just 3 weeks ago, was, by far the most significant. Now, obviously, only 1 person was killed in that attack, but Iran was targeting we believe, the Mossad HQ just outside Tel Aviv. So they were going for very sensitive sites. And Israel had promised on multiple occasions since then to hit Iran hard, to tell the Iranian regime that they would regret having carried out that attack. Now, I think the point to hit home right now is that, yes, it looks like Israel has not gone after those oil or nuclear sites in Iran. I think there'll be a big sigh of relief in Washington, in European capitals too. Basically all of Israel's allies have definitely been lobbying the Israeli government not to go after the most sensitive sites, the nuclear and oil sites. At the same time, we just don't know right now to what extent Israel has hit the Iranian military. So what we're getting from Israeli sources right now is that they have gone after multiple military targets. Now, are we talking about missile launch sites? Now, that would be, a bit of a tit for tat in sort of broad terms. The Israelis were hit by 200 ballistic missiles from Iran. If they hit their missile launch sites, that feels like, a sort of fair response, I think, in broad terms. Have they gone against military bases, more significant military assets beyond missile launch sites? Have they gone against naval bases? At the moment, we're only hearing explosions around Tehran, so we haven't got any indication of that. So I still think there's a big question mark about to what extent this is a severe, as Israel has been promising, response against the Iranian regime. And then again, it will come back to the Iranian regime's calculus. They will have to see how serious a response this is, how hard they've been hit. They'll have to look at their military capabilities, and they'll have to make another calculation about whether or not they do hit back against Israel. And again, we're into this dangerous game. I mean, we've talked about the war in this region spiraling out of control. I mean, in a way, we're already, and have been for a number of weeks, in a very slow spiral. And what people probably didn't realize is that when a military strike like this happens, it doesn't necessarily mean that the other country will hit directly back immediately. It's a very dangerous game in a way that's being played, where both countries are trying to make the point, deter the other from attacking them again in a more severe way, possibly take out military assets in the process, but hope that the response is not so severe that it gives the other side a green light, a very clear green light, to hit back immediately. And then you get into that big fear, which is the fear of US officials and any of Israel's allies, that this could lead, and at the moment we're not seeing signs of that, but this is the big fear, that it could lead to an all-out direct conflict with multiple strikes in either direction between the two sides. And that would be an altogether much, much more dangerous prospect for the region and for the world.
And Tom, this is a response to what happened 3 weeks ago, but we also saw back in April another barrage of drones and missiles and other projectiles coming from Iran into Israel, and that was in response for something Israel did. So as you point out, this is not one of those things that you would see in a movie where there's a strike and it's an all-out war, but this is closer to something like that than we have seen in a long time. The calculation is from Iran, or has been, that its proxies, Hezbollah, Hamas, and others in the region, would shoot rockets and sort of tangle with Israel. But in April, Iran said directly, we are going to attack Israel. And since then, the world has been on edge. So even though it takes, as you point out, weeks for a response, as this did, this really is, as you say, we are kind of spiraling in that direction in this part of the world.
We are. There is that risk, definitely. And I think, let's look back to April, Phil, and put tonight's strike, even though we have limited knowledge about it, what we know into context. We have to read the signs at this point and just what we've got from official sources. But if you think back to April, I was here just after Iran launched that massive barrage of missiles and drones at Israel. And then Israel responded a few days afterwards, and they hit, but we didn't get exactly the precise details from precise sources, but we know that air defense systems close to nuclear sites near the Iranian city of Isfahan were hit somehow, but by the Israeli military. And, you know, that was a measured response, but it clearly sent a signal to the Iranian regime that, look, we can take out your air defenses right next to your sensitive sites, AKA we can also take out your most sensitive sites if we want to. Now, you wind the clock on to tonight and look at exactly what information we have right now. And if we're seeing explosions around Tehran, that suggests to me that tonight's response from Israel is much more significant. But we'll have to wait and see the full extent of it and exactly what targets Israel has gone after.
Yeah, and we know it can take some time to figure that out. Tom Sufi Burridge from Tel Aviv. Tom, thank you. We have this just in from the NSC spokesperson, Sean Savat. This is a quote. "We understand that Israel is conducting targeted strikes against military targets in Iran as an exercise of self-defense and in response to Iran's ballistic missile attack against Israel on October 1st. We would refer you to the Israeli government for more information on their operation." That is from an NSC spokesperson. If you are just joining us, we are in breaking news right now. Iranian state TV reporting several strong explosions inside Iran near Tehran. Sources telling ABC News that this is the beginning of Israel's retaliation against Iran. And this comes on the heels of that Iranian missile barrage into Israel. Most of those missiles were intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome defense system. This was back on October 1st. Iran's attack came in part in response to Israel's killing of Hezbollah's longtime leader, Hassan Nasrallah, in Lebanon. And just last week, Israel forces continued their attack. And just a short time ago, Israel confirmed for us that it is conducting precise strikes in Iran on military targets. So what we have right now, we originally had those reports from inside Iran. Now the IDF has confirmed to us, and we have the statement from the NSC spokesperson. Everybody knows this is happening. Israel has said they are not going after nuclear infrastructure, which was the Biden administration's biggest concern about what would happen when Israel did eventually retaliate against Iran. I want to bring in Louis Martinez now at the Pentagon. Louis, what else are U.S. officials saying about this right now, I guess in their limited understanding of what's happening?
No, that's exactly right, Phil. I mean, across the board, U.S. officials that I've been talking to are trying to get a sense, trying to get a handle exactly what type of response the Israelis are carrying out right now inside of Tehran. And I should say, though what we are seeing are these social media reports about activity in Tehran, we should remember that there are other military locations throughout throughout Iran. So potentially we may see other reports popping up as the night progresses. But right now, I think what we're seeing is just now the initial reports of something happening inside of Tehran. And one of the things that you get from that statement that we got from, that ABC received from the IDF, that they are not attacking energy infrastructure inside of Israel, indicates that this is what was going to be called a proportional response, that they're going to be targeting military sites within Iran. And so I think that's one of the key things that we need to keep in mind. Remember that when that strike of almost 180 missiles was launched towards Israel back on October 1st, the missiles that actually got through past the air defense systems that the Israelis have were at military facilities, namely one of the large Israeli Air Force bases in southern Israel. And so since then, I think the talk has been about the United States walking back Israel from striking at energy infrastructure, because that could exacerbate things, and just limiting themselves to military strikes. And I think that's what we're seeing tonight so far.
And Louis, we've been following this back and forth between U.S. officials and the Netanyahu government, obviously trying to broker a ceasefire with what's gone on in Gaza. But beyond that, how Israel would respond to Iran, this barrage of the 180 projectiles, the missiles, the ballistic missiles that they fired just 3 weeks ago. What type of support does the U.S. already have in the region? Kind of, you go through, we know there are carriers there, but there are some troops that just went to Israel with a defense system.
No, you're exactly right, Phil. Just today, CENTCOM confirmed that a squadron of F-16s had arrived in the Middle East region, and that it was operational and ready to assist to kind of bring stability to the region and potentially assist Israel should there be a response from Iran in the future. And what are we talking about? We're talking about the United States having 40,000 forces in the region. Yes, you mentioned that there's an aircraft carrier. There are destroyers in the region. There are also these destroyers offshore in the eastern Mediterranean off the coast of Israel that are capable of shooting ballistic missiles fired from Iran, and that was actually the case during the attacks in April and the most recent attack on October 1st. But you also have additional air defense systems. So these 3 squadrons of aircraft that have been flowed in, they are doing what is called a plus-up here in military terms. That means that they are in addition to the units that are already there. This was going to be a temporary move because these units that were already there inside of the Middle East were going to be returning home. These are the replacement units. What you do is you hold over those air squadrons a little longer as the new aircraft come in, and you've doubled the size of your air component. So that was one of the defensive measures that the United States put in place recently in the wake of the October 1st attack, and we're now seeing it in place. But again, the United States has a lot of capability in case they need to assist Israel with their air defense. But as we've seen in these 2 attacks now against Israel, Israel has a very strong air defense system. Everybody knows about Iron Dome. That deals with rockets being fired at short range and at low altitudes. But they also have something called the Arrow, and they have something called the David Sling, and those can intercept incoming ballistic missiles to great effect. So, and now, as we know, the United States sent that THAAD missile battery, which essentially does the same thing and potentially can cover some of those areas that were exposed during the most previous attack on October 1st, namely that base down in southern Israel.
And Louis, we know that the concern since October 7th for world leaders has been that this escalates perhaps even out of control in this particular area of the world. Now that America does obviously have the assets that you were just talking about over there, what is the level of concern at the Pentagon for the troops that went over with the THAAD defense system and the other American assets in the area?
Yeah, definitely a level of concern for the 100 service members, mostly soldiers, who are responsible for that THAAD system inside of Israel. But not only that, Phil, we're talking about American forces throughout the region. The concern is that if this becomes into a regional conflict, you have U.S. forces in Saudi Arabia, in Qatar, in Bahrain, UAE, Kuwait, the entire area right across from the Persian Gulf. So those are forces that could be exposed, and that's why the United States is mainly concerned about the force protection of those units. Now, those units are going to have air defense systems, but then you've also got the units that are inside of Iraq and inside of Syria. Excuse me. And what you have there is that those are the ones that have been most exposed over the last year or so to incoming fire from Iranian-supported militia groups. So how does the United States deal with that? They have put in place defensive measures there as well. But one of the big concerns is that these Iranian-backed proxy groups, as they're called, supported groups in both in Yemen, which, as we know, has been striking at tons of commercial traffic going there through the Red Sea, and also the same groups that are carrying out these attacks on Iraq and inside Syria, that the risk has been, the concern has been here at the Pentagon, that those groups would once again strike really strongly at U.S. forces that are exposed because they don't have the infrastructure that they do have in some of the other countries.
Yeah, Louis, that's such an important point because we've seen some attacks on U.S. interests in that area since October 7th because America is an ally of Israel and supports Israel's ongoing right to defend itself. So we've actually seen that, and this, of course, could get worse for troops over there as well. Louis Martinez from the Pentagon. Louis, thank you very much for that. President Biden has been briefed and is closely following these developments as this retaliatory strike is happening, according to the White House, an official there. Chief National Correspondent Matt Gutman joins us now on the phone. Matt, you're just back from Israel. You have been reporting from the region nonstop since October 7th. What are your sources telling you about what's happening right now?
It's our understanding, Phil, that this is the beginning of something. Sources say that they think that this might be a one-night strike. It might be more, but this is clearly the retaliation. And I think what Louis said is very interesting and relevant, right? Israel at this point seems to be going for a limited assault, something that is splashy and big and grabs headlines because they feel that they need to retaliate in a bigger way than they were hit on October 1st in that historic missile strike, arguably the largest missile strike ever fired in the history of military warfare. So they felt like it needed to be splashy, but I would not be surprised, and sources have told us that it's likely the case, that there has been a quid pro quo in which the Biden administration has said, hey, listen, we're going to send you more coverage. You're going to get THAADs. We're going to have destroyers there with anti-missile capabilities. We're going to help protect the Israeli homeland if you minimize your attack. Do not go for the nuclear sites. Do not go for the energy sector, the Harg oil terminal on the Persian Gulf. That could cause regional and global problems. So we'll work with you if you work with us. And it seems that there was some sort of agreement in place. Both Israel, Phil, and Iran have made it quite clear that they do not want to be engaged in a regional war. Iran has been clear that it doesn't want to be actively fighting Israel itself. That's why it has enlisted and surrounded Israel, as Louis noted, with those proxies. There is Hezbollah in Lebanon, there is Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, another Hezbollah group in Iraq. There are others as well. So they wanted them to sort of do the dirty work for them. But engaging in a direct military confrontation with Israel is not something that Iran has wanted to do. The question tonight is this a big enough attack for Israel to be able to say, okay, we showed Iran that they can't mess with us? And is it small enough for Iran to be able to say, okay, we consider this matter closed, the Israeli damage was minimal, and we're all going to move on with our, previous proxy wars? That's what we don't yet know at this point. And I think once the dust settles and we get daylight in the morning in the Middle East, we'll know a lot more.
And Matt, when daylight comes in the morning, I want to turn to this because your reporting has been so fascinating to me. You were just there in Israel to mark 1 year since October 7th. And I think a lot of people forget before October 7th, there were hundreds of thousands of people in the streets of Israel protesting what was happening with the judiciary. And now I want to know your thoughts because you're speaking to everyday Israelis. When they wake up in the morning and they see that Israel has done what Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying for weeks now, that Israel would retaliate against Iran for the October 1st barrage of like 180 missiles fired at Israel. What do you think the consensus is going to be, if there's even going to be a consensus among the Israeli people about what's happening?
One of the things that I picked up from that last trip, which happened to coincide with the October 7th anniversary and that massive ballistic missile strike, was the near unanimity among Israelis that that they wanted Israel to strike back hard at Iran. It's one of the things that I think is the most unifying political agendas that I've seen since October 7th, right? People were unanimously and universally traumatized by October 7th, and there was a lot of fear struck in Israel by that Iranian attack on October 1st of this year. And that's because I think more of those missiles managed to penetrate Israel's air defenses than many people anticipated. There was particularly a number of missiles that were targeting Israel's intelligence bases just north of Tel Aviv, like 5 miles north of Tel Aviv. And some of the missiles that missed the bases hit Israeli streets. And I think people got a sense of how powerful those missiles were. We saw the site of one of them, and just the dirt and gravel that was splattered by the impact of the missile was caked over every possible surface you can imagine in a radius of 200 yards. The missile actually hit right in the middle of a boulevard in a grassy area, creating a crater about 30 feet deep and about 60 feet in diameter. But it hurt no one, but it gave you a sense, or at least me a sense, of how powerful these missiles, which are the size and weight of a school bus, can be. And that rattled Israelis. It also rattled them that these missiles could get through. So there is near unanimity in Israel that they wanted Israel to retaliate and hit Iran hard. But I think there's also unanimity in Israel that they're tired, Phil. They've been fighting war, this continuous war now in basically 3 or 4 fronts, some say 5 or 7 fronts, for a year now, right? There are Israeli soldiers fighting and dying in Lebanon, Israeli soldiers in Gaza, so much death in Gaza, thousands of people killed in Lebanon. They've been fighting the Houthis in Yemen. They've been launching strikes against Iraq, strikes in Syria as well, and now in Iran again. So Israelis are tired, and they hope that Israel strikes back enough that it sort of ends this round of war and that they can start wrapping up the campaign in Lebanon and, of course, end the war in Gaza and bring home the 100 or so hostages that remain there, only less than half of which are still believed to be alive, Phil.
Yeah, and there is this thought among Israelis that, it differs. If you're talking to Israelis about what's happening in Gaza, there will be a split there. Everybody wants the hostages home, of course. But when you talk to Israelis, they really do see Iran as the regime sort of pulling the strings here with all of the Iranian proxies. Matt Gutman, thanks for the reporting. Appreciate it. I want to bring in now retired Colonel Steve Ganyard, who joins us. Colonel, what's your first reaction to what we are now seeing? The IDF saying that they are striking Iran precisely, the IDF saying they are not going after nuclear infrastructure.
Yeah, I think still that Matt alluded to this indirectly in that the U.S. would not have supplied that THAAD missile system if the Israelis had said, nope, we're going after nuclear targets, we're going after oil or petroleum infrastructure, because that would have created a global problem, and it would have created a global problem right before a major U.S. election. So I think what we need to do is step back and look, at the three-dimensional chess game that's being played in the region. What does Israel want? Israel wants the war in Gaza and Hezbollah to end, and they want Hezbollah to be pushed back north of the Litani. They want Hamas to be defeated. But none of that happens without Iran somehow in the equation. And so if, as we think tonight, the Israelis have gone after targets that are strictly military targets, where it seems like it's proportional, where under the law of war, just as the Iranians did, the Israelis can say, we did what was done to us, eye for an eye. If that's the case, and it keeps the door open to discussions between Hezbollah, Hamas, and their overlords in Tehran. And that's the key here, to not push things so far that this becomes a global or a regional conflict that could have global implications.
So what you're saying is, in this three-dimensional chess game, because this is your world. The average American watching this across in the Middle East is saying this could be spiraling out of control. But what you're saying is that Israel and America have been talking about this, and U.S. wouldn't have sent what they sent if the Netanyahu government was going all out and just going to destroy any kind of uranium enrichment facility inside Iran. So this might be Israel sending a message to Iran saying, listen, let's sort of sort this out now. What do you think the odds are that Iran strikes back after this?
There may be something that Iran will throw back, Phil, but I think it would have been Iran does not have anything like what Israel has in terms of missile defenses, air defenses. They have no significant air force. Everything they do is sort of on the ground through Quds Force and the IRGC. But I think what's important here is that the Israelis are showing a bit of restraint, knowing that restraint could lead to a spiraling up or spiraling in. And something that will at least lower the tensions. Israel still needs to get to some sort of brokered agreement where Iran is included at the table. They won't admit that. What the U.S. is pushing for, it's what Qatar, it's what all of the Gulf states are pushing for. And going after things like oil infrastructure, which, frankly, the Israelis could have taken out quite easily. They could have taken out 100% of the 2 million barrels a day of oil that Iran exports, mainly to China, but taken 2 million barrels off the market instantaneously, which would have roiled global markets. It would have irritated the Chinese, and it would have turned into a global issue. So I do think that so far what we think we see is restraint by the Israelis, eye for an eye. Had to go back. They couldn't take the pummeling that they took from Iran and not respond. But hopefully, Iran will respond only in a modest way to say that they did something. And then, again, I'm an optimistic guy, so hopefully we can begin to move towards some kind of a resolution that will involve all the parties, to include Hamas, to include Hezbollah, to include Lebanon, and to include the Iranian threat.
And all of this, I know that we talked to families of hostages still being held. All of this makes them nervous, that this makes it more difficult to get those hostages home. It seems like we're so far out from October 7th. Now we've crossed the 1-year mark. Steve, I know you say that you're optimistic, but do this for me, if you will. What is the worst case scenario here, and what is the best case scenario? Obviously, the best case scenario, what the world is hoping happens, but sort of game it out for us here. What's the worst thing that could happen because of this, and the best?
Yeah, I think that the worst case would be if Iran hits back in a very significant way. And why I don't think that's going to happen, Phil, is because the U.S. excuse me, now has boots on the ground, and there is a risk that if Iran sends up the same kind of barrage that we saw just weeks ago towards Israel, and we saw some of those missiles get through. The THAAD is only complementary. It's not some magic capability. But if some of those got through, and if they hurt or killed any U.S. personnel, then Iran has just bought themselves a war with the United States. So Iran has reasons not to escalate this. But they could sort of retrench and say, nope, we're not talking to anybody. The war goes on. We're going to keep this war going until the last Hezbollah fighter and the last Hamas fighter. We have no interest in declaring any kind of a rapprochement or a ceasefire. That's, to me, the worst case. That would force Israel to move farther into Lebanon. We saw that they've lost 10 soldiers in the past few days. It's very tough fighting in southern Lebanon, where Hezbollah has been dug in. But Israel wants to push them back north of the Litani River, which gives them that sort of it would almost turn into a demilitarized zone that would protect the northern part of Israel from shelling and from rocket attacks from Hezbollah. But that would be very bloody, and that would probably be the worst case for Israel, is to have to go in and conduct that ground campaign that would push Hezbollah and all of those dug-in guerrilla fighters another 10, 15 miles north from where they are. Best case is that Iran says, okay, we'll shoot some back at you. We'll do it in a way that we know that you can intercept them, and we'll at least say we both traded punches, and everybody saved some face, and now we allow the diplomats to get involved and have the diplomats both and that would include say Russia, maybe China, because China doesn't want their oil taken off the market. It would include all of the Gulf states. It would include Egypt. It would include the UN, the EU. Everybody would pressure the Iranians to come to the table to resolve this, as I said, three-dimensional chess match that's going on in the region.
All right. Steve Ganyard, it is always great to have your expertise help us navigate our way through these global issues. Appreciate it. All right, take a look at this picture we just have in from the office of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It shows the Prime Minister at the command center during the attack, as the attack was happening on Iran. Chief Foreign Correspondent Ian Pannell joins us now. Ian, what are your sources telling you?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think it's worth just stepping back and seeing where we are just over a year since that terrible October 7th attack. Hideous as it was, tragic as it was a localized attack. And now we're talking about multiple attacks, multiple fronts throughout the region. We've obviously got this ongoing conflict inside Lebanon, which doesn't seem to be going particularly well for Israel on the ground. You've got continual rocket attacks from Hezbollah. You've got Israeli attacks in Syria, in Iran, against the Houthis in Yemen. So we keep talking about the risks of escalation. In many ways, this has already escalated. It's just a question of whether you can kind of keep a lid on it right now. I think what we're hearing from the Israelis and what we're seeing right now is that this is a proportionate response to the large Iranian missile barrage back on October the 1st. If that is it, if this is the beginning of something larger, then I think we're in a whole different ballgame. But if it is proportionate, that this is Israel saying, it's punishment for what happened on October the 1st and sending a clear message to Iran, and I think Matt's absolutely right. I don't think either side wants all-out war, then I think it can be contained. But also, I don't think we should forget that what happened on October the 7th exposed Israel, its vulnerabilities, and potentially its weaknesses. And this was a moment where Israel It was a reckoning, if you like. So Israel had to obviously go after Hamas, although clearly there are many doubts about the way it's conducted that and the ongoing operation, the tens of thousands of people have been killed in those terrible scenes we're seeing from Gaza. But it's also about a reckoning with Israel's other enemies. And the list goes on, of course. There's the Houthis, there is Hezbollah, but all of this eventually traces back to Tehran and Iran itself. And what Netanyahu's been very clear about for a long period of time is he wants Iran weakened. He wants to remove the nuclear threat. Now, there's no suggestion that's what they're going after now. I think it's very telling that they've made it clear they're not going after energy infrastructure or the nuclear sites. But we have to wait and see whether this is just a one-off series of strikes this evening or whether this is part of an ongoing process.
All right. Ian Pannell, thank you very much. I want to go to Mary Alice Parks, our White House correspondent. Mary Alice, what is the White House saying tonight? Obviously, the president has been briefed. We've heard the IDF say they are not going after nuclear facilities, which is obviously a sigh of relief there at the White House, I would imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, the White House is confirming that the United States was not in any way involved in this response, Phil. I think that is a very important distinction for the United States to make to the world. We know that the United States was actively involved in helping Israel defend against those attacks from Iran, sort of respond and defend against those missile attacks on October 1st. And the Biden administration wanted that to be publicly known, that they were assisting and responding and making sure that that more of those missiles did not make it through. But there is a clear and distinct differentiation happening at the White House between helping Israel defend itself versus actively being a part of this response. Look, I think in the last few weeks, in the last few months, arguably, Phil, there's been a serious conversation about whether President Biden has much influence when it comes to his conversations with Prime Minister Netanyahu, whether Netanyahu is listening to the advice of President Biden. I think that tonight it is clear that the White House is feeling a little bit better on that front. I mean, we know that in the last few weeks, the president has said that he was being briefed by the Israelis, talking personally to Netanyahu about their plans, about his plans to respond here and what they plan to carry out when it came to Israel. We know that when they had the two leaders, when they talked on October 9th, that the Biden administration and the White House felt pretty good that their argument to Israel that it should not go after energy sites, not go after nuclear sites, was well received and was well listened to and respected. And so I think that in this moment, if this does seem to be, as we've been talking about all night, more of a sort of a proportional response, if there's not energy and military sites that were hit, I think the White House is going to feel good that the advice from the president was listened to and that was a big part of Israel sort of heeding a warning from the United States to try to lower the temperature here, to try to respond proportionally. I thought it was very interesting what Steve Ganyard said there, that we know in the last few weeks the United States has sent military, has sent troops to Israel to be on the ground in Israel, and that maybe that is a part of trying to sort of give Israel an insurance policy, try to make sure that Iran does not respond again because they don't want to risk hurting a U.S. Active duty military member and what that could mean going forward. Looking ahead, Phil, we know that Blinken was just in the region. He's back now, but he said in a press conference in Doha on Thursday that negotiations will resume with Hamas when it comes to the war in Gaza, with trying to find an end to that war and bring the hostages home. We know, of course, President Biden, Vice President Harris have been laser focused on that part of the equation, trying to find an end to the war in Gaza, Phil.
Mary Alice Parks from Washington, D.C. And Mary Alice, we just have this in. Defense officials are confirming what Mary Alice just told us, that the U.S. has no involvement, or the U.S. says it has no involvement in the Israeli strikes, and that, this is a new piece of information, the U.S. was notified by Israel ahead of time before these strikes happened. So, Mary Alice, thank you, and thank all of our reporters tonight. That's it for now. I'm Phil Lipoff. We will continue to follow the unfolding breaking news from the Middle East as Israel strikes Iran. We'll have more news and context and analysis of the day's top stories for you as well. Thanks so much for streaming with us.
teachers, no child is to be sent to the principal's office today. Kids, if you want to do crime, now's the time. Happy first day in school.
Weren't there like 4 more of these?
Yeah, we were robbed.
Hey, buy 3, get 1 free. I'ma call your mother on you. Bring the rest back here, boy.
Trick or treat!
When I flick this switch, there'll be a horrible noise and a terrible odor. Will it hurt? Pain like you've never known. Oh!
Seems risky.
I am much satisfied.
What? You scared? This is happiness.
We love Halloween.
Got me.
He's a bit silly.
Turning the machine off! Do you feel good?
True, natural beauty, untouched. One of the last of its kind. But this comes at a cost. 5 countries. 5 incredible real stories of adventure, danger,
We have to go.
and deceit. These are the last lands, the national parks around the world that have to be saved.
Liam Payne, loved by millions of fans.
It's literally so heartbreaking.
Good morning, everybody. A lovely day here in Argentina.
The drugs they found in his system were shocking. Cocaine, party drugs, benzos, crack.
Liam and his bandmates lived their lives in the tabloid headlines, whether they wanted to or not.
I'm sure I'll be fine. Those famous last words. Liam Payne's Final Days, now streaming on Hulu.
Election night, this is where America turns for answers. ABC, Election Night.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Phil Lipoff in for Lindsay Davis tonight. Thanks so much for streaming with us in this edition of the race for the White House. But tonight we are going to also begin with some breaking news. Israel has confirmed it has begun conducting what it calls precise strikes in Iran on military targets. Iranian state TV has reported hearing explosions in Tehran. Now, take a look at this picture just in from the office of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, showing Prime Minister Netanyahu at the command center. We've just learned the U.S. was notified ahead of this operation, and the U.S. says it has no involvement in it. This comes on the heels of that Iranian missile barrage into Israel. Most of those missiles were intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome defense system tonight. We are just 11 days to the race for the White House until we elect a president, and we are focused on what impact the next president will have across the world. What will the fallout of this strike be? Will it reverberate across the campaign trail? It will definitely be talked about by both candidates as soon as possible. A new poll just out from New York Times and Siena College, their last one before the election, shows this race is a dead heat. Each candidate now with 48% among likely voters. It doesn't get any closer than that. Vice President Harris in Texas tonight, appearing in a star-studded rally with Beyonce. That's in Houston. The former president also in the Lone Star State. But first, our Tom Soufi Burridge reports from Tel Aviv on these late-breaking developments.
Tonight, Israel unleashing its long-awaited retaliatory strike against Iran. Moments ago, the IDF saying it conducted precise strikes on military targets in Iran in response to that unprecedented Iranian missile assault earlier this month. Iran firing about 200 ballistic missiles towards Israel more than 3 weeks ago.
The regime in Iran and its proxies in the region have been relentlessly attacking Israel since October 7th on 7 fronts, including direct attacks from Iranian soil.
Iranian state TV confirming strong explosions heard around Tehran. The US had been pressing Israel only to strike military targets, not Iranian oil or nuclear sites. The exact scale of tonight's attack still unclear. Israeli officials saying both offensive and defensive capabilities are fully mobilized, adding Israel has the right and duty to respond and to defend its people. Israel has been intensifying attacks on both Hamas in Gaza and Iran-backed Hezbollah militants in Lebanon.
All right, let's bring in Tom Soufi Burridge now from Tel Aviv. Tom, what's the latest you're hearing from the IDF specifically about these strikes?
Yeah, well, we've just been hearing from an Israeli official, Phil, and actually one crucial line we're getting right now is that this operation is still ongoing and that we're looking at waves of strikes, according to this official, through Iran. So the implication is not just potentially around Tehran. So we are seeing, you know, those reports from Iranian state TV of explosions in the area of Tehran, but it is quite possible, according to an Israeli official tonight to ABC News, that we're also looking at other targets across Iran also being hit. The key point from the IDF statement is that they are saying that they are only hitting tonight military targets. Crucially, not Iran's oil or nuclear sites. That, of course, is what the US administration had been pressing Israel for. We know that the US has supplied an advanced air defense system here on the ground in Israel with 100 US troops on the ground to potentially defend Israel if and when Iran responds. So look, you know, at the moment this is an ongoing situation. We're still getting information in real time. It looks right now that in some senses Israel is tempering its response. It is not, again, going for those most sensitive sites in Iran, according to Israeli officials. And if that is the case, it looks like this is a calculation from Israel, at least. But again, Israel has been promising a very severe response. And Israel's doctrine of deterrence, Phil, dictates that it wants the Israeli government to send a very clear signal to the Iranian regime that it means business, that if Iran were to strike back and retaliate for this attack, then again, it would face even more severe consequences.
Yeah, and that seems to be, we were speaking with Matt Gutman earlier on, who's been in the region, you know, reporting alongside you. I'm wondering what you think the Israeli people are going to think when they wake up in a few hours and hear this news, because now, you know, there is a fight on another front. Granted, Israel has been entangled with Iran directly with Iran since April, but now they're waking up with what's going on in Gaza, with what's happening on the northern border with Hezbollah and Lebanon, and now this. What do you think will be the response from everyday Israelis?
I think most Israelis, on the face of it, from what we know now, from the facts that we have from Israeli officials, that Israel is only, we believe, going after military sites. I think that is something that most Israelis will welcome and support. I mean, look, you know, Israel, the government, Israel, the people, definitely hold Iran responsible for Hezbollah's actions. They see also Iran as a backer of Hamas. So look, you know, they see the proxies in the region who have carried out multiple attacks against Israel, most notably on October the 7th, but obviously in Hezbollah's case repeatedly, pretty much every day since then. So look, the Israeli people, the Israeli state, know that the ultimate enemy in all of this is the Iranian regime. So, I think if this is a series of strikes against military targets, and if, it's a big if right now, the Iranian regime does not carry out any kind of immediate reprisal, then I think, you know, there'll be widespread or broad support across Israeli society for this on the face of it. But again, we are in this kind of very difficult and dangerous moment where the two countries are trading attacks. I mean, albeit there is a period of time between each one up until now whereby each regime tries to calculate, you know, exactly what type of response it believes it can take against the other country, hoping that it won't mean that in turn, the other country will carry out a strike, a much more severe strike in response. So, but we are in this kind of very slow spiral of attacks between Israel and Iran. And I look back to April. I mean, you know, in April, we were all sitting here absolutely flabbergasted that Iran was actually attacking Israeli soil for the first time in a direct military attack. Because of that second attack just 3 weeks ago, we're now slightly used to this, you know, very dangerous trade-off that Iran and Israel are currently carrying out.
Yeah, it is a line that hadn't been crossed before. Tom Soufi Burridge from Tel Aviv. Tom, thank you. Louis Martinez is with us now. Louis, I want to ask you what U.S. officials are telling you. We've now heard that the U.S. was given a heads up right before this strike.
No, that's exactly right, Phil. We are hearing from several U.S. officials that the United States was given a heads up by Israel that they were going to conduct these attacks inside of Iran. And also we are hearing from U.S. officials that there is no U.S. involvement in this operation right now. Now, I'm going to call this an operation, and it's important to hear what Tom Soufi Burge just mentioned, which is that this is an ongoing operation. That indicates that it's going to be multiple waves. It's not just one wave of attacks. And it's also some of the locations that we're seeing indicate that they're not just limiting themselves to inside of Tehran, the capital city, but of course to maybe potentially to other military facilities across the country. Now, we can infer that these are going to be military sites because we have information from the IDF that they are not targeting energy locations, energy being oil facilities and nuclear facilities. So that's what we're looking at right now. U.S. officials are keeping a close tab on what is going on inside right now as this operation continues. It's unclear exactly how long it's going to move on for, but I think important to note that it is ongoing and that it's going to be carried out in waves.
Yeah, and as Tom just told us, there are going to be waves, as you mentioned, of those strikes. Louis, as we continue our conversation, I want to take another look at the skyline. This is in Beirut, Lebanon, and we have seen smoke rising from this skyline before as Israel has attacked inside Lebanon, attacking Hezbollah targets. We know they killed Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, along with Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas. Israel can be very precise when it wants to be, and it says it is striking only military targets tonight. Talk about the support that the U.S. has already sent to Israel and has in the region.
Well, Phil, we know that the United States has sent about 100 soldiers to man what is called a THAAD, anti-air defense missile battery. This is a system that can shoot down ballistic missiles at very high altitudes and essentially offers another layer of air defense to what Israel already has. They have, as you mentioned, the Iron Dome. They also have David Sling. They have the Arrow. All systems that were used 3 weeks ago to shoot down incoming fire from Iran. But now it's enhanced by this system that's there. And again, American forces now in Israel directly involved in the protection of Israel. And so what happens there? Could they become potential targets? That's obviously something that the United States wants to prevent from happening. That's why they're concerned about the force protection of all of their forces in the region. It's 40,000 American troops inside the region, Phil, and they are spread out on aircraft carriers, on destroyers, and on land we have those air bases as well as ground troops. Now, when we talk about the air defense systems, we're talking about another THAAD missile battery that's somewhere in the region. U.S. officials don't want to disclose exactly where it is. But we also have the squadrons of aircraft that have been flowed in to replace squadrons of aircraft that were going to go out. We know that just earlier today, U.S. Central Command acknowledged that an F-16 squadron had arrived. So what the U.S. military has been doing is by plussing up the force levels inside of the Middle East, what they're doing is they're keeping those units that were going to return back, those air squadrons that were going to return back to the United States after they completed their deployment, and they've more than doubled the number by keeping on hand the units that were going to replace them. So now instead of 3 squadrons in the area, you have 6. You also have all these other systems that are in place. We talked about the Navy destroyers. They are capable of shooting ballistic missiles as well, and they've been employed both in April and in October.
You know, Louis, it's a good reminder, and it's a good time to pause and realize that that Americans are deployed all over the world, and just because they are not directly engaged in an action doesn't mean they are not certainly in danger, and they all are there keeping us safe. So, Louis, I appreciate that. Thank you. White House correspondent Mary Alice Parks joins us now. Mary Alice, what is the White House saying tonight outside of the fact that they were given a heads up before this strike?
And that the U.S. was not directly involved, like Louis was talking about. I think this is an important distinction that the United States is going to want to make sure that the world is aware of. On the other hand, of course, we know that the president and the White House wanted to make sure that the world knew that the United States was very much involved in actively helping Israel defend itself back on October 1st when Iran was launching sort of that attack, and that Israel sort of needed its help to defend its airspace. Look, we have a limited statement from the National Security Council, basically just confirming confirming what we've been talking about. They understand that Israel is conducting the targeted strikes, that it is in response to that attack from Iran on October 1st, and mostly asking reporters to follow up with the Israeli government, again, trying to put some distance between this White House and the Israeli government when it comes to sort of this operation carried out by the Israeli government tonight. We know the president is back in D.C. He's at the White House. He's being briefed and monitoring all of this closely. We've had sort of members of the White House staff responsive to our questions tonight, but at this point, a pretty limited response. They want to make clear that they are paying attention and that they feel, I think, pretty confident, pretty good that Netanyahu, that the Israeli government sort of listened to some of the advice from Biden and from the White House in trying to sort of offer a more limited, more proportional response. At least that's sort of seems like the beginning of the picture that we're seeing tonight. Phil.
Mary Alice, as you are keenly aware of, we are 11 days out from the election. Is that another reason why the White House, you think, didn't want Israel to exacerbate this conflict? I mean, they talk about an October surprise. It doesn't just have to be here in this country.
Oh, no doubt. No one in the White House wants to see a war escalate in the region. I think the election is a part of that, adds pressure to that. But honestly, that's been the case for a year. They have wanted to see this, any sort of escalating. They've been very anxious about anything escalating beyond Gaza, beyond then an extended front in Lebanon. But yes, of course, the election puts increased pressure. I mean, there was a question if Israel hit, just for example, if they were to have hit energy sites, what that would have done to energy markets, to oil prices around the country, let alone, of course, the concerns about human suffering, the concerns about war sort of exacerbated and growing in the region. Look, the focus of this administration for months has been to try to lower the temperature in the region, to try to bring an end to the war in Gaza in particular. That has been a focus of President Biden, of Vice President Harris's. They were hoping both from a diplomatic standpoint, but also, of course, from a political standpoint, to bring an end to the war before the election, and that continues to be where they are putting so much of their attention and resources in these last few weeks, and even just this last week with Secretary of State in the region. Blinken just got back to D.C., I think, just yesterday.
Yeah. All right. Mary Alice Parks from Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. Mary Alice, thank you. Tonight's retaliatory strike from Israel comes more than 1 year after that deadly terror attack on October 7th by the hands of Hamas, and 1 year since Israel went after Hamas by conducting an ongoing operation in Gaza. Now, the world is looking at the presidential race here in this country with bated breath to see who the next commander-in-chief will be and how their time in office could change the course of conflicts like the one between Israel and Hamas and now Iran, also Hezbollah. Tonight, from the war in Ukraine to the Middle East, conflict to the largest migration in the world in South America, we are covering all the foreign tensions that remain a top issue going into November 5th. This week, the world looked on as some 20,000 Palestinians are now on the move after Israel ordered them to evacuate once again. What will it look like to get both sides to agree on any kind of resolution? And what about the civilians caught in the middle? We go back to Tom Soufi Burridge in Israel tonight.
The horror in Gaza is deepening, even as the US says it's pushing for peace. Children among scores of civilians injured and killed when Israel hit this school Thursday where families were sheltering. The IDF says it was targeting Hamas. Today, these houses flattened in a series of Israeli strikes overnight. Ahmed saying he helped pull 4 of his cousin's kids out from under the rubble. And at the nearby hospital, in every one of these bags, the bodies of several children. Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry said 38 people were killed in that attack. Most of them were women and children. The IDF said it took out gunmen and military infrastructure here. The IDF moving tens of thousands of people out of part of northern Gaza where it's on the offensive. Surrounded by Israeli tanks, a vast column of people ushered through the apocalyptic destruction. And this the scene yesterday at northern Gaza's main hospital, overflowing with injured children and babies clinging to life. Today, the World Health Organization said it was deeply disturbed after the IDF said it had begun an operation against Hamas inside the hospital compound. The medical director warning on Thursday, if the fighting doesn't stop, the hospital will become a mass grave. Across Gaza, there is now a daily crush for bread. Heavy fighting in the north means the small amounts of food aid crossing into the strip can't be transported safely, says the UN, to those most in need. Khalil al-Shanar saying, if we don't die from the war, we will die from hunger. Today, the IDF confirming 3 more of its soldiers killed in Gaza. This IDF reservist served in the war for 3 months. He says the pain and suffering have to end.
The amount of damage and death that we did in Gaza in the past year, it cannot be brushed off, and is definitely immorally deeply wrong.
The killing of Yahya Sinwar last week, the leader of Hamas and the mastermind of the October 7 attack, was described by US officials as an opportunity to end the war. With the IDF now escalating its attacks, there is no end in sight. How long until you're finished?
Well, there's a difference between Hamas is a military, a terror army, and a guerrilla force.
Is the price, is the civilian cost worth the very small number of Hamas fighters you're taking out?
I will tell you, we're taking hundreds of Hamas fighters in that area, but I want to tell you, every loss of innocent life is a tragedy on both sides.
Tom Sufi Burridge reporting once again for us from Tel Aviv. Tom, thank you. To Ukraine now, where it has been nearly 1,000 days since Russia invaded, starting a war that has seen countless military and civilian deaths. This week, we learned North Korea sent troops to Russia to train for potentially joining their efforts in that war. Just weeks after Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky journeyed to the U.S. to request more help from the U.S., additional support. But the fate of that conflict could all rest with who America chooses as its next president. Ian Pannell joins us now to brief us on the war and what the final results could mean for Western democracies watching from the sidelines. Ian.
Phil, more than 2.5 years since this war began, and the situation on the ground is as dire as it has ever been. I was recently inside Ukraine, and there is a real war weariness that's set in across the country. It doesn't matter who you speak to, soldiers on the front line, teachers, firemen, the list goes on. 2 key fronts to be aware of. In the Donbass, Russian troops have been advancing, both sides suffering from a lack of manpower, Ukrainians also suffering from a lack of ammunition and low morale. The other key front is Kursk, of course. This is the area of Russia that Ukrainian troops took over in August of this year. They're still kind of holding on, but now reports that North Korean troops could be coming to Russia's rescue. Both the United States, South Korea and others are saying that those troops are inside Russia now, training and could be deployed to the front line, leading to fears that this could escalate. What does this mean in terms of the US election? Well, I don't think the election matters more to any other country right now than Ukraine. You have 2 very different worldviews. You have Donald Trump, who says highly improbably that he's going to end the conflict within 24 hours. I think that's totally impossible. But also essentially not backing Ukraine in terms of saying that he wants Ukraine to win, and also not criticizing Russia in the way that the Biden administration has. Kamala Harris kind of represents continuity for the support of Ukraine, at least publicly, verbally so far. So I think Ukrainians are watching. They're waiting with bated breath, and the future of Ukraine absolutely depends on the outcome of the US election. Phil?
All right. Our thanks to Ian Pannell. And still to come tonight, how those foreign conflicts, all of them, could be contained or exacerbated even further depending on who wins the presidency. As we count down to Election Day, a top member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee joins us for more. Stay with us.
I did terrible things. I hurt a lot of people.
I know who you are.
Ball is in the air! You're special. Yes, it's a touchdown! What if God made me this way?
FX's American Sports Story. Aaron Hernandez. All new Tuesdays at 10 on FX. Stream on Hulu.
This ship is heaven.
There should be no guilt on a pleasure cruise. Doctor, it's your job to keep everybody alive.
No pulse. She's in VFib. 1, 2, 3. Clear.
I have a pulse.
You're gonna be okay.
Welcome back. Before Israel strikes on Iran tonight, we spoke with Representative Kathy Manning, Democrat from North Carolina, and the vice-ranking member on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. We spoke about the possibility of investigating Elon Musk and allegations today that Chinese hackers have been targeting the cell phones of U.S. politicians. I also asked her about Israel's other front in Gaza. Secretary of State Blinken said today, and we'll quote it for you, the only path to save the region from war is Israel to stop the aggressions on Gaza and on Lebanon. You agree with that statement?
Well, I think the main way that we could stop the problems would be for Hamas to surrender and to turn over the hostages. And don't forget, we have American hostages, including a fellow North Carolinian who's been held hostage for over a year now.
According to Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry, 2% of the population there, more than 42,000 people, have been killed. Jordan's foreign minister said today that Israel is committing ethnic cleansing, their words. Do you think that's the case?
No, not at all. I think that the death of innocent Palestinians is terrible. And I think the blame lies with Hamas. Hamas has embedded itself among civilians. They use civilians as human shields. They have put their weapons caches and their headquarters underneath civilian apartment buildings and hospitals. And with Sinwar now gone, this is an opportunity for Hamas to lay down their weapons, release the hostages, and stop the disaster that they've brought upon their own people.
Representative, before we move to Ukraine and Russia, I just got to ask you one question. I totally hear what you're saying, and you hear so much of the world troubled that there's been so much death and destruction there. You point out that Sinwar was killed by the IDF, Nasrallah, as well as Nasrallah as well. So how does this end?
Well, there clearly is going to have to be an agreement. And I'm happy that Secretary Blinken has been back in the region, working with the Qataris, working with the Egyptians, working with the Israelis. They have got to come to an agreement. But the agreement is going to have to start with Hamas releasing the hostages and giving up its weapons and moving out of the region.
All right, so let's turn to Ukraine and Russia, if you will, another conflict that has continued unabated. NASA's chief today suggested that Elon Musk should be investigated for his ongoing communications with Vladimir Putin. Is that something that your committee would investigate? And if so, how would that proceed?
I think the investigation might be with the Intelligence Committee, but certainly it's something that our committee will be very interested in. It is appalling to think that an individual who has such wealth and such power is communicating on an individual basis with a tyrant who is responsible for the death and destruction of so much of Ukraine.
And Representative, I want to get your thoughts on this before you go. Intelligence sources told ABC News that the Chinese hackers targeted the cell phones of former President Trump and J.D. Vance, as well as some Democratic officials. A Trump spokesperson today didn't blame China, though. He blamed Vice President Harris, saying, quote, "She represents a weak American." Your thoughts on that?
I think that's ridiculous. I am deeply concerned about hacking into the phones or the information computers of both presidential candidates, as well as our military and other entities. And I think we need to do everything we can to make sure that anyone who's hacking into our systems is held accountable. But the hacking is being done by malign actors as far as we know. In China, in Russia, we need to get a handle on all that situation. And I'm confident that my committee will be looking into it.
All right, Representative Manning, thank you so much. We appreciate your take on the matters and the time you're spending with us this evening. Thanks so much. And that is our race for the White House coverage for this hour. I'm Phil Lipoff. Stay with ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. Thanks so much for streaming with us.
When you're 61 years old, you have very few opportunities to change your life. This time, I have to be ready. This is about everybody like me. I see a future, which is not what I felt like for a really long time. I don't feel invisible now.
Hollywood Studios want us to make a movie of our podcast.
It's a fabulous cast.
Action. I'm nervous playing you. The fearlessness, the complexity.
Oh, stop. Unless you had more to say.
I don't need an algorithm to tell me that this is box office gold.
Only Murders in the Building, streaming on Hulu and for bundle subscribers on Disney+.
True natural beauty, untouched, one of the last of its kind. But this comes at a cost. 5 countries, 5 incredible real stories of adventure, danger,
We have to go.
and deceit. These are the last lands, the national parks around the world that have to be saved.
What does it take to be the most watched newscast in America?
We are part of an operation. Is this our combat operations center? We're approaching the gate. Militants came in from... Hi. Appreciate you. Thank you.
Ismael? David.
ABC's World News Tonight with David Muir is America's most watched newscast.
Trick or treat! When I flick this switch, there'll be a horrible noise and a terrible odor.
Will it hurt?
Pain like you've never known.
Seems risky. I am much satisfied.
What? You scared? This is happiness.
We love Halloween. Got me.
He's a bit silly.
Turning the machine off! Do you feel good?
We're reporting on board a U.S. Navy destroyer in the Eastern Mediterranean. I'm Maggie Rulli. Wherever the story is, we'll take you there. You're watching ABC News Live.
Reporting from the path of Hurricane Helene in Tallahassee, Florida, I'm Micah Jachi. Wherever the story is, we'll take you there. You're streaming ABC News Live.
Welcome back to ABC News Live Prime. I'm Phil Lipoff in for Lindsay Davis tonight. Thanks so much for streaming with us. The race for president is heating up with just 11 days to go. Tonight, Vice President Kamala Harris appearing at a star-studded rally in Houston, Texas with Beyonce. But we're going to begin with this breaking news. Israel has confirmed to us it has begun conducting what it calls precise strikes on Iran, on military targets. Iranian state TV has reported hearing explosions in Tehran. So take a look at this picture that we just have in as well from the office of the Israeli Prime Minister, showing Prime Minister Netanyahu at the IDF Command Center. And we've just learned the U.S. was notified ahead of the operation, and the U.S. says it has no involvement in it, just that they got a heads up. Back at home, a new poll just out from the New York Times and Siena College showed this race is at a dead heat. Each candidate now with 48% among likely voters. Whoever wins will inherit the crisis, obviously, in the Middle East. More from the trail in a moment, but first, ABC's Tom Soufi Burridge leads us off from Tel Aviv on these late-breaking developments.
Tonight, Israel unleashing its long-awaited retaliatory strike against Iran. Moments ago, the IDF saying it conducted precise strikes on military targets in Iran in response to that unprecedented Iranian missile assault earlier this month. Iran firing about 200 ballistic missiles towards Israel more than 3 weeks ago.
The regime in Iran and its proxies in the region have been relentlessly attacking Israel since October 7th on 7 fronts, including direct attacks from Iranian soil.
Iranian state TV confirming strong explosions heard around Tehran. The US had been pressing Israel only to strike military targets, not Iranian oil or nuclear sites. The exact scale of tonight's attack still unclear. Israeli officials saying both offensive and defensive capabilities are fully mobilized, adding Israel has the right and duty to respond and to defend its people. Israel has been intensifying attacks on both Hamas in Gaza and Iran-backed Hezbollah militants in Lebanon.
All right, so let's bring in Tom Sufi Burridge, who's been with us from Tel Aviv all night. Tom, what's the latest you're hearing from the IDF about these strikes, or at least from Israeli officials you've been able to speak with?
Yeah, I think the key line right now, Phil, from the IDF is that they are targeting military sites, so not Iran's oil or nuclear facilities. That is clearly something that the US has been pressing Israel to do for the last 3 weeks, ever since Iran launched that barrage of ballistic missiles against Israel. We're just hearing a short moment ago from Israeli officials saying that this operation is still underway and will last potentially hours. Another Israeli official is saying that this series of strikes is expected to last just tonight. So if that is true, that is significant. We're not looking at something from an Israeli perspective that is meant to last beyond tonight. But look, I think on the one hand, this looks like it is tempered, that the Israeli response is measured in the sense that they're not going after those highly sensitive sites, the oil industry in Iran, its nuclear program and its nuclear sites. On the other hand, what we're picking up, I think, generally, even though this is really kind of coming into us by the minute, is that this is a very significant series of strikes, according to Israeli officials, against military sites, potentially military bases, not limited to just the area around Tehran, is the indication we're getting from Israeli officials, potentially bases to the west. You know, we don't know the precise targets right now, but it might be that Israel is going after missile launch sites. You know, that would be a clear signal to the Iranian regime. It would not only take out potentially some of their capabilities to strike back at Israel again, but also would be that kind of clear signal that if you strike us, we'll hit you back hard. I mean, that's been the message, Phil, from Israeli officials throughout the last 3 weeks, ever since Iran launched those ballistic missiles at Israel. The message has been clear. We will hit you hard. We will make sure that you regret launching that series, that massive, unprecedented ballistic missile attack against Israeli soil. But again, it seems that Israel has at least listened to the US, and ultimately the Israeli government was keen to press home the point that although that they're listening to the US, they would make their own decisions. But it seems tonight that this is a very, very significant strike against Iranian military targets, but not going after those sensitive nuclear and oil facilities.
Tom, with just 11 days to go to the presidential election here in this country, there will obviously be a reverberation here. We'll figure that out in the hours and days to come. But there in Israel, before October 7th, Prime Minister Netanyahu was embattled. There were protests in the street against him, against his government. I'm wondering what do you think the consensus will be when the Israeli people wake up tomorrow morning and learn about these strikes? Because it seems like Iran is a unifier for the American for the Israeli people.
Yeah, I think that's true, Phil. I mean, I think it depends what happens in the next few hours, and I think, you know, we can't read that right now. You know, it might be that Iran doesn't launch any kind of reprisal attack in the immediate term. And you know, if that is the case, if Israelis wake up tomorrow morning and we've had a fairly calm night here in Israel, or a completely calm night, then I think most Israelis will be pleased about what has happened. They will believe, I think, most Israelis that Israel had to respond. I think that's the doctrine of deterrence which, you know, the Israeli state has you know, had underpinning it in recent years, in particular in relation to the threat which Iran poses and its proxies. You know, that notion that if Iran were to attack us, we need to hit them back harder so that will deter them from attacking us again. Now, look, you know, back in April, Iran launched, you know, more than 300 drones and missiles at Israel, and that was the first time Iran had directly militarily attacked Israeli soil. Israel then, we believe, it wasn't exactly clear the nature of the attack, but they took out air defense systems near to nuclear sites. It was a kind of warning, but it didn't deter, you know, the future escalation that we had. So look, tonight it's uncertain how Iran will respond. All eyes on them, I guess, now. But again, according to an Israeli official, this military operation against military targets in Iran by the Israelis is still ongoing.
And going in waves, as you've reported. All right, Tom Soufi Burridge from Tel Aviv. Tom, thank you. Louis Martinez is with us now from the Pentagon. And Louis, I'm wondering what more U.S. officials are telling you. Our Mary Alice Parks has told us, and I'm sure you're getting the same information, that the U.S. was given a heads up before Israel began this wave of strikes. All right. Sorry about that, Louis. We're having a problem with your microphone. We're going to try to... Oh, we have you, Louis?
Yes,
Go
I'm sorry
ahead.
about that.
Go ahead.
So, yes, in response to your question, yes, United States officials are contacting me to tell me that, yes, the United States was not involved in this incident tonight, in this attack being carried out by Israel. But that most importantly, the United States was given a heads up that this was coming. That's very important because we've seen recently, very recently, that Israel has carried out some high-profile attacks, like the one against the leader from Hezbollah, Nasrallah, where the United States just got notification a very short time before it happened. In this case, I think because the United States is looking for the force protection of its units inside of Israel and now in the broader Middle East, that was a very important factor for the United States, that they wanted a heads up, and that has taken place. So I think that's a very important thing to notice.
Also important, Louis, is the U.S. support for its ally, Israel. Talk about the support that's already there in the region, the assets already there, the military assets that are already there, and what kind of support Israel is getting from it.
Phil, the United States has sent additional fighter aircraft to the region to support Israel in case Iran responded again. They've sent a very high-end missile battery, an air defense system called the THAAD that can intercept incoming ballistic missiles at high altitudes. We have aircraft carrier that's in the Abraham Lincoln that's in the Arabian Sea. Among these 40,000 troops that I've been talking about, there are some ground forces, there's the naval component, and the fighter squadron. So when you put it all together, it's a sizable U.S. presence inside the region. And one of the things that we've been told is that it is better suited for a potential response by Iran than what we saw when Iran carried out their first attack back in April. That's one of the things that the United States is really making the point, that it's less about the numbers and more about the capabilities that the United States has. And another thing, they have destroyers in the Eastern Mediterranean off the coast of Israel that could potentially assist if there are any incoming missiles from Iran, and that's already happened. The United States has fired and shot down several missiles back in April, and also 3 weeks ago when Iran carried out its latest attack. So again, what needs to be determined is how Iran will respond to this ongoing operation inside of Iran right now. And one of the concerns, I think, is will Iran retaliate again, and will they do so very quickly instead of waiting almost 2 months for the previous attack in response to the assassination in Tehran of the political leader of Hamas, Haniyeh.
And Louis, you're talking about the military personnel and the assets that America has over there in the region. There's a lot of them. What is the level of concern at the Pentagon for the forces?
Yes, not only it's once you have these forces in the region, Phil, there's the concern about how do we protect them. The United States, I think, feels that they have adequate protection for their forces, obviously aboard the ships. But I think when it comes to land, there's concern because a lot of these U.S. forces are stationed in Gulf countries right across the waters of the Persian Gulf from Iran. And the concern has been is if this situation escalates into a broader fight, then those U.S. troops there could be exposed. But I think they have the adequate resources. That's why we've seen the surge of the additional fighter aircraft, the surge of the additional air defense systems. But I think the most exposed are the U.S. forces inside of Iraq and Syria. They're the ones that have been experiencing more than almost 200 incoming rounds of rocket fire, missile attacks. And these are troops that are operating in semi-permanent capacity there, but they are very exposed. And I think they're exposed because they come under fire from these Iranian-backed militia groups that fire at will. And now they had been doing so for quite some time, but then things have kind of tamped down in recent months. The question is could Iran say to these groups yet again, okay, you're free to fire at U.S. forces again? That's something that the United States wants to avoid.
Absolutely. Louis Martinez from the Pentagon. Louis, thank you. We will continue to follow these developments out of the Middle East. But right now, we're going to pivot to the campaign trail. Vice President Kamala Harris holding a pretty massive rally right now in Houston, Texas. A lot of star power. Jessica Alba, Willie Nelson already, and Beyonce to come. Let's bring in ABC's Zohreen Shah. Zohreen, this is part of a very pointed campaign blitz ahead of the last few days on the trail. What results is the Harris campaign looking for? The impact of big events like this? Is this to get new voters, the very few people that are undecided in this country, or is it to get out the vote?
It's a really interesting play, Phil. A lot of people asking, why is it even in Texas, right? I mean, yes, Texas has 40 electoral votes, but none of them are probably going to go to Harris. I mean, this is a state that has gone Republican since 1976. The last time it went Democrat was in 76 with Jimmy Carter. And so the real play there is really making a case for reproductive rights. In fact, if you look at the banner that keeps kind of going across the stage right now, it says vote for reproductive rights, vote for freedom. It doesn't say vote for Harris. She is pushing this issue very hard right now. She believes Texas is ground zero for this fight in reproductive rights. And this is, you know, there's a close to total ban on abortion in Texas, which she is likely going to be pointing out. She has been talking about how Trump appointed 3 Supreme Court justices. They overturned Roe. That's something that Trump frequently brags about. She is linking this idea of reproductive rights with freedom of a woman's body, a freedom to choose. Of course, that is the song that Beyonce sings, that she uses frequently in her campaign. And of course, Houston is also Beyonce's hometown.
Right. And so, Zohreen, I mean, this question is, I know the answer. When I say what's the significance of having Beyonce with you, I think anybody would want Beyonce at any event because she's Beyonce, right? But the significance of having a hometown huge celebrity with her at this particular rally, we're still waiting for it. What's the significance of that? What is she trying to do with Beyonce outside of just being her presence?
Yeah, Phil, you're our resident ABC music expert. I don't have to explain this to you. I mean, Beyonce is just simply massive. I mean, her Renaissance World Tour boosted the economy reportedly by $4 billion. She has more Instagram followers than Taylor Swift, well over 300 million. This is also something that Dems have really wanted. They have waited for. You remember watching our coverage of the DNC when that rumor broke out that Beyonce would be there. TMZ reported it. It wasn't true, but it really got a lot of Democrats excited. So they finally get to see her tonight alongside Harris. And this is a moment when, of course, that matters so much more. We are less than 2 weeks away from the election. And actually, if you're watching the live stream of Harris's rally, it says specifically, you know, 10 days, 4 hours, whatever it is until Election Day. We're a lot closer where something like this can potentially make more of an impact for a candidate. And that sort of thing also, by the way, Phil, and you know this, it gets underneath Trump's skin. I mean, he talks about it in 2016. He said in Michigan, he doesn't need a Jay-Z. He doesn't need a Beyonce. He doesn't need other pop culture icons. And there are not a lot of pop culture icons who have sided with him. And of course, Beyonce, there is a sense of nostalgia for Democrats. You remember when Barack Obama, his inauguration night, when she performed there, that's a moment that some Democrats want to see again. They want that history. They want that moment back. And that potentially signals something, symbolizes something in this moment.
Yeah, and historically, the Dems get more of Hollywood to come out for these rallies than the Republicans have, at least traditionally, recently. Vice President Harris wasn't the only one in Texas today. We're looking at a video that they were just playing. Obviously, reproductive rights, as you mentioned, is one of the themes coursing through her campaign and this particular rally. But we just saw Donald Trump up there. He was in Texas today. What was he doing there, and what kind of contrast is he drawing between himself and the vice president?
Yeah, I mean, he was in Texas just a few hours ago. He spoke to Joe Rogan for his massive podcast there. He held a rally in Austin. He is going really hard on this topic of immigration. Texas especially a good place for that. He says that he wants to end migrant immigration. He wants to deport every last criminal alien. Harris, for her part, she's drawing that contrast. She's pointing out that border apprehensions are down since the Biden administration signed that executive order on immigration. She has claimed that they've cut that flow of immigrants by half. And you see that race to the finish with them drawing that contrast on one of the hottest topics, immigration, abortion, a lot of it playing out in that big state of Texas.
Yeah, and on stage right now, as you can see, I believe as we're getting closer to Beyonce, the woman there, and I believe that is her husband, she was the Texas woman denied an abortion, and she has actually been in political commercials, political ads for Kamala Harris during this cycle. I'm wondering, you're looking at this rally, and you saw the former president's rally earlier on. What strikes you as the difference between the two in terms of tone and tenor?
In terms of her tone, it's really interesting. I mean, the last several weeks, I should say the first few weeks of her campaign, there was a lot of joy, right? And she's really changed the direction of that. And some Democrats are even saying that change, that shift, signals to them that this race is getting so much closer. She's a lot more fierce with her rhetoric. She's really going hard at Donald Trump on some of these issues. You don't feel so much of that joy anymore, right? In her tone, in what she's saying. I'm curious what it's going to be like tonight, especially with Beyonce on the stage, if we'll feel some of that joy back. But it's certainly a different tone. With Trump's rallies, I personally haven't seen a big shift in Donald Trump. He seems consistent, that same Donald Trump. And that could mean something as well if you're really taking a very close look at this race and at both the candidates. Harris, the race has really, really sort of, it has tightened for her in a way that it just wasn't just a few weeks ago, Phil.
And I'm curious, Zareen, do you think that's one of the reasons her campaign is there? Because, I mean, you look back at the last two elections, the former president won in 2016, Texas. He won Texas in 2020. It's most likely looking like he will take Texas in this election. It's not really one of the battleground states we talk about. So she goes right into the heart of Texas. And I know that's, this young woman on stage is proof positive that you can go to Texas and talk about reproductive rights. But why do you think she goes right to Texas on this particular day?
Yeah, I mean, you said it, right? Like, there's virtually no chance Texas goes to the Democrats. And as I mentioned earlier, the last time it did go to a Democrat was 1976 with Jimmy Carter. But you have her going to Texas in this moment, presumably just to make this case about abortion. I mean, Texas has a near complete total abortion ban, right? So to talk about this issue, to talk about reproductive rights, it is one of the most ideal states for her. You have her doing really well with women in this moment. Not as well with men. And so to talk about this issue, it makes sense almost to go to this place where you have that woman who's taking stage right now, right? And I believe this is the woman, I can't actually see that picture up, but I believe this is the woman who either had a miscarriage or had a very hard time having a child and couldn't get the health care that she needed. And so this is one of the places that Harris can talk about this issue in a way that she can't necessarily in a similar way in other battleground states.
Yeah, Amanda Zurawski, she was denied a medically necessary abortion, and she's been a pretty powerful spokesperson during this campaign for the vice president. Zareen, thank you very much. Stay with us. We're going to bring in a contributor and SiriusXM radio host Mike Muse right now. Mike, what are your expectations tonight when Beyonce comes out? I mean, I was just thinking that I've only really heard her accept speeches. I mean, give speeches when she accepts awards. This is going to be sort of a rare thing to see Beyonce in this setting, is it not?
It won't be actually rare. I think those who follow Beyonce knows Beyonce. I call her the Mariana Rivera of politics. She's the closer. When there was speculation that she's going to be part of the DNC, I instinctively knew that she wouldn't because it's too close for her. Beyonce normally comes up towards the GOTV time period with the closing days remaining. And why? Beyonce is politically astute, understanding that celebrities do not sway individuals' vote. Most people are not going to vote for a candidate because their favorite celebrity says so. But what ends up happening is these celebrities can amplify issues of the moment. And the most important thing to amplify is to get out the vote. In particular, as Texas has begun early voting, in this moment, remember, Phil, not only is the national press there like us, but you also too have the most important wing of the press, which is local. You have local newspapers, local radio, local print. They're all there on the ground reporting reporting live from this rally, and they're going to report about this in real time. They're going to report about this tomorrow, and at the end is going to remind the citizens of Texas that early voting is taking the stage now. And what you see right now, Phil, is the energy of that room. While you were talking to Zerlene, I was taking a listen to what I was hearing. I was hearing the song Neck, which is a very popular HBCU marching band that is a traditional song. I heard that. You saw the energy of the crowd. Next after neck, the DJ played a popular song called Set It Off. Why is that important? That is a theme song for her sorority, the D9 Alpha Kappa Alpha, that they popular strolled to. When I saw that, the crowd erupted. Phil, that's what a candidate wants at the closing days. People are exhausted. They have donor fatigue. They have door knocking fatigue. They have phone banking fatigue. What you want is this type of electric atmosphere with these type of celebrities to remind your base that we still have time to go. Stay excited, stay engaged, stay enthused. Now is when it counts. This is the last mile. So to have someone like Beyonce there, that is what the purpose is for. And Phil, you follow music as well. Beyonce has been very open about her fertility challenges that she's had with having children and the difficulties she's had with miscarriages. So reproductive rights is part of her brand and part of her story, so it makes it natural. She is a hometown Texas girl from Houston. She just released Cowboy Carter, which is centered and rooted in black cowboys and cowgirls within Texas. Third, Beyonce is all about female empowerment. She creates these big female anthems. And as we all know, this race is coming down to gender, the male vote and the female vote. And so what you want to do is encourage that base, in particular the female vote, of the importance of this election and to remind them of the issues and the amplification, the pure sheer power of Beyonce being there does that. She also too has men followers and fans as well, just as the narrative of Vice President Harris has been saying on the campaign trail. When they ask her, is she the candidate for female? She says, that's not what I'm seeing. She said that yesterday. She said in a press conference, she said, I'm seeing women and I am seeing men. And that's what I'm seeing out there right now in that arena. Men and women, multi-generational and multicultural, who are very charged up at this rally. And we haven't even seen Beyonce or Vice President Harris yet.
No, we haven't. And as we continue our conversation, I just want to point out that that is Democratic Senate candidate Colin Allred, who is on stage. He's going to get a big boost. That's part of this night as well. He's running to unseat Ted Cruz there in the state of Texas. So he's speaking right now.
That's important, Bill.
Yeah, go ahead.
So that's important too as well, because whether or not Vice President Harris will be able to turn Texas blue, that is an issue that we'll find out come at the end of election night. But what is important is the down ballot. And what we know about this race is going to be very unique is you're going to see different dynamics of split tickets in different states. Some people may vote for the top of the ticket, a presidential candidate, but they may vote on a different party for the senator or for their congressperson or for their state representatives. Having this type of energy to come out brings attention to Colin Allred. This is probably one of the biggest audiences that Colin has going to have throughout his entire campaign. It reminds Texas that he is there. He now gets a chance to speak in front of the local press, the local media, the local radio, to get his message out there. And I think when this vote, this race is going to come down to the margins, not just in the battleground states for the presidential election, but it's also too going to come down to the margins for Representative Allred if he is going to defeat the incumbent Ted Cruz to really rack up the votes and the margins in Houston and Dallas and Austin. And so having a rally like this with a megawatt celebrity like Beyonce helps the down ballot. So I definitely think we're going to see some movement for Colin Allred. And if Vice President Harris is going to be able to get her agenda done, she is going to need to have a Senate that is majority a Democrat in order to help pass her legislation, which is also too why you see former President Trump recognizing that dynamic too as well, and is working to ensure that the Senate flips Republican in order to help advance if he was to become president.
Mike, two-part question. First of all, I want to know if you know what Beyonce will be doing tonight. Is she going to be speaking? Is she going to be performing, as we saw Bruce Springsteen perform last night? That's the first part of the question. The second is, we all saw she allowed Vice President Harris to use her song Freedom within 24 hours of Harris picking up the mantle from President Biden. Do you think she's going to continue? Do you think this will be a one-off, or will we see her over the course of the next 11 days as well?
All great questions. I will take the second one first. When she did that, that was a signal that she had when she allowed Vice President Harris to use Freedom as her campaign song, that was a signal that Beyonce was endorsing Vice President Harris. A presidential candidate or any political candidate cannot use an artist's song without their permission. An artist can protest if a presidential candidate has what they call a political license from a publishing company like ASCAP or BMI. They can get a grouping of the catalogs with permission to use. But an artist can contest the use of that political license and have it removed. The fact that Beyonce did not contest it, to have it removed, was one of the first part of the endorsement itself. The second part to your first part of the question is, do I think she would sing or speak? My leaning is going to be both. Because of the fact that Beyonce does have a voice, she does have a strong constitution of what she believes in, and when she feels strongly about something, she doesn't have any qualms with speaking it. Singing, I think she's going to sing Freedom. That's a very popular song amongst her fan base, as well as the theme song of not only just the Harris campaign, but that has become the central closing argument of Vice President Harris, which is freedom, which is why you're going to see her coming up shortly in D.C. at the Eclipse to really use the Washington Monument and the National Mall as a backdrop of freedom to close it out. Now, in terms of will we see Beyonce knocking on doors and phone banking, that I'm not quite sure. But I will bet money on this, Phil, and we can come back and talk about this afterwards. Before Election Day, we will see an Instagram post from Beyonce, I'm sure encouraging vote, some type of paraphernalia with Harris merchandise. Beyonce has a very strong strategic Instagram social media. That is how she conveys messages. So I definitely think we will see some social media posts.
Yeah, that would definitely. Can you imagine her knocking on your door and asking for your vote, Mike? Listen, you talk about how strong her social media presence is. I'm not sure that there are two bigger stars on the planet than Beyonce and Taylor Swift. Both have come out and endorsed. And man, if votes were followers on Instagram, this wouldn't even be close. Kamala Harris would have hundreds of millions of votes. That's not the way it is. So I'm wondering, she's got arguably two of the biggest stars on the planet, two of the biggest female stars on the planet. And there is a huge gender gap in this election we know of. How powerful do you think these two endorsements are going to be? Because we know traditionally it's not a make or break situation.
Phil, that's why I always love talking to you. You just get it, bro. If you think about Taylor Swift, historically, Taylor always goes first when it comes to campaign season. Taylor doesn't get involved in the GOTV efforts in the closing aspect of it. She's more of the middle of the race dynamic. And what you see with the Taylor Swift endorsement was something that was very transferable, which I think you will also see with Beyonce, is the idea of getting the number of people that went to the website to register to vote. Now, we saw an uptick in the traffic. We saw an uptick in the inquiries. We saw an uptick in the number of people who registered to vote. Now, we don't know who they voted for, right? We don't know if they're going to be Republican voters, they're going to be Democratic voters, but we do see that there was an increase in voter interest, voter curiosity for registration. That translates to actual votes on the ground. I think we're going to see the same thing happen with Beyonce, is the reminder that it is here, it is early voting. The Democrats have had this messaging of make a plan to get out the vote. You start seeing the Republicans now actually doing the same thing. And I think, Phil, this is speaking not just to Texas, but to the nation of maybe you should check in right now to see, is your state early voting? Maybe this is a reminder if you were feeling apathetic to voting, like, all right, I see this energy, I see what's happening on the ground, I should probably want to exercise my right to vote. And this is also true, although it's in Texas, it's still being picked up, Phil, where? Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Florida, Georgia, right? All these very important battleground states, North Carolina. So this is a state rally, but it's really much a national rally. And Phil, that goes to how just unconventional this election cycle is. This is about earned media, which is why you see former President Trump really understands this really well, which is why he's going to be hosting a rally at Madison Square Garden in New York. Not because the campaign thinks that he can win the state of New York, but because of the amount of earned media he's going to receive just from the palace intrigue alone of what is he going to say? He's in his home state. I'm sure the arena will be packed out. It's going to go viral. We're going to hear clips about it, right? And in particular, that is a smart campaign strategy of the Trump campaign, because of the ways that the Harris campaign has outpaced the Trump campaign in fundraising and having cash on the ground, which typically goes towards marketing and advertising dollars, to which there is a gap of a delta that the Trump campaign has. And so for him to do those type of events at Madison Square Garden helps make up the delta of the money they don't have to compete with Harris cash on hand, pound for pound. And so this is a very much untraditional race, which is why I'm glad that you and I are discussing it, because you also too know, Phil, that this is an unconventional race in an unconventional time using unconventional means.
Absolutely, and that is an arena with 30,000 people. We're told it's the biggest campaign rally for Kamala Harris since she became the nominee, the Democratic nominee for president. And I just want to let you know this, Mike, because I know as we were talking, you're probably not listening to the music, but Mary J. was playing while you were talking, and that is perfect to have behind you as we're watching this, the screen there say vote. You have the American flag, the Texas flag, vote, freedom, everybody waiting for Beyonce. It kind of feels like the Democratic National Convention a little bit. And again, to your point, this isn't really to change voters' minds. We know there aren't that many undecideds in this country, although there would be enough to, you know, if it's 10,000 here and 10,000 there, it could swing the election. But this is really to get people off the couch and out to vote, right? To energize, you know, the base and anyone who is perhaps thinking about, I don't know, I don't want to get off the... This is it. This is, look, excited, get up and vote.
Phil, you make my job way too easy. Thank you for that question. I've been really frustrated with this question of, does these celebrities is going to get the undecideds to change their vote? That's the wrong way to look at this, Phil. This is all about energizing your base to get to the polls, as you said, to get them off of the couch, right? In particular, early voting. Early voting is going to be, I believe, one of the difference makers on whether or not who is going to be raising their right hand on Inauguration Day with their hand on the Bible. It's interesting that you mentioned Mary J. Blige, because Mary J. Blige was just inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame last weekend. And when you think about Mary J. Blige, again, another artist that is all about female empowerment. Mary J. Blige has a way of connecting with her audience, in particular her female audiences, about the journey of womanhood, the journey of what it means to be a woman here in America and in society today. And so the fact that you astutely mentioned Mary J. Blige, again, it goes to the female empowerment, it goes to the reproductive rights, and Mary J. Blige, to herself, I am very familiar with conversations, does have a political interest in the terms of being passionate for those who cannot speak for themselves. And so, again, if Mary J. Blige did not want to have her music played there, she definitely could contest it. And so, again, this is all about connecting the dots and narratives. I get so frustrated, Phil, when elected officials, they go and grab an influencer just because that influencer maybe has 1 million followers. But that influencer has 1 million followers based upon changing a tire, right? But just because an influencer has 1 million followers or changing a tire doesn't mean they should be speaking about reproductive issues. American public is tired of the gimmicks. They're tired of being, thinking that they are so simple-minded that they're going to just follow this person because of 1 million followers. Campaigns now are getting smarter, in particular with the Harris campaign, of how to strategically use celebrities and influencers when it's appropriate. I couldn't think of a more appropriate time to use Beyonce than in her hometown of Texas. Reproductive rights, it's ground zero. Beyonce has had openly challenges about infertility and reproductive challenges that she's had, and she's been seen as a working mom. I know it's hard to imagine our celebrities, in particular someone like Beyonce, as a working mom, but she is a mother of 3. She is a wife to her life partner, Sean Jay-Z Carter, and so you actually see a working mom balancing it. Now, she has some help, but there is a dynamic of the working mom theory, also to fighting for reproductive rights and really female empowerment.
Yeah, and Mike, to your point and to the story that you're talking about that fans know of Beyonce, Mary J., similar. Her fans love her, as you said. I was able to, I think I had an interview with her about a year ago. Being in her presence is something else, but fans love her in part because of her life experience, because of how she lived, because of what she was able to overcome. That's a story very familiar. Kamala Harris has been out there saying, I'm a kid from a middle-class family. That's the story as you're talking about with those two women. I want to ask you about men, right? Because there is a gender gap here that we have seen, specifically among young men. You see the former president going on the Joe Rogan podcast. That's very specific and pointed as well. Talk to me a little bit about what's happening with the gender gap in this election and what Kamala Harris needs to do to peel off some more of the young male vote.
That's such a great question. And again, I'm glad that you're framing it as such, because I'm glad you didn't insert the black man vote, right? We've been focusing so much on black men. And when you focus it on making it about race and gender, you take away from the over-looming narrative that it's about misogyny, right? Men across the board, white, black, Hispanic, other, there's a challenge of misogyny and wanting to vote for a woman president. There's a reason why America is one of the most modernized Western countries that we have, and we still have yet to have a female president. That goes to gender biases, that goes to misogyny. So this is why this campaign, I'm very characterizing it as, the gender battle. Using Joe Rogan, I think, was very interesting. Phil, we had a very interesting week with celebrity endorsements, aside from Beyonce and Bruce Springsteen. We also, too, had a really interesting dynamic between, and I don't think, Phil, this has been picked up enough, between Joe Rogan and Eminem. Full disclosure, Eminem is my boss on J45 on SiriusXM. But for him to introduce President Obama and support Vice President Harris in Detroit in the same week that former President Trump is going on the Joe Rogan show, if you look at the Venn diagram, Phil, there is an overlap of a fan base that Joe Rogan shares with Eminem, and that is men, right? And this is one of the rare first times where you have two powerful men on opposite sides of the political ideological spectrum going after that male vote that they share an overlap with. Joe Rogan's going to appeal to that male vote that Trump is trying to shore up. Eminem appeals to that male vote that Vice President Harris is trying to peel off of and to increase her margins, in particular in a state like Michigan, where Eminem is. What we fail to realize is that hip-hop isn't just about black people. Hip-hop is the most consumed genre of music. It is one of the most downloadable genres of music, and hip-hop transcends race, class, culture, ideology, identity. Phil, on our morning show, I get callers who are Republican, Democrat, Green Party, agnostic, you name it, across the country I get, who love hip-hop but have a different ideology. So Eminem being in a battleground state, particularly in the rural parts of outside of Detroit, which is both suburban, but it's also equal part rural and working class, in particular blue-collar working class. That's the unions, the UAW. That's your tier 1 suppliers of the automotive industry, your tier 2 suppliers of the automotive industry. It is the owners of the mom and pop diners and the coffee shop and the dry cleaners. Eminem speaks to that group. And so those fans who represent that spectrum of identity politics follow Eminem, so it would get to them that they can then say to themselves, okay, it's voting time, I need to make a plan, it's early voting, what am I going to do?
Yeah, and it is fascinating, as you say, you talk about two men on different sides of the political spectrum. Rogan has a ton of people who follow him. Eminem, obviously, hugely popular. The discussion about what is a real man. We heard those comments from the former president about Arnold Palmer, a golfer, those comments about him in the shower. Clearly trying to get at what a real man is, the identity of a real man. And I think that there has been a lot of people out on the campaign. There have been a lot of people out on the campaign trail talking about that, trying to say there's not just one definition of a man. And it's fascinating because you have that gender divide in this election, and reproductive rights is such a huge issue, especially running through the Harris campaign. And yet the discussion of what is a real man might be so important in the final few days of this election.
You're so right. As you were talking, Phil, what I was thinking about was the DNC versus the RNC. And we've seen that the Trump campaign has been gearing up towards this argument and narrative and thesis of male identity. That is why even before former President Trump went on the Joe Rogan podcast, you had him bring out Dana White, the owner of the UFC, at the RNC. This is also too why you saw Hulk Hogan come out and support former President Trump at the RNC. Really leaning into male masculine identity means tough. It means aggressive. It means a certain era of brutality. And I use that specifically because that is what the UFC represents. That is what Hulk Hogan, at the time, the WWF, now the WWE, represents, although it is character-driven, this idea of brutality, fighting, being physical, I am man. But I thought was really interesting, though, Phil, when you looked at the DNC, in particular, it was the day where they focused on reproductive rights. And they had different vignettes of families that were on the stage and women who had either suffered from challenges around reproductive rights and choice. But you know, Phil, the first family of the vignette that kicked it off, you had a father standing next, or a husband standing next to his wife, discussing how it impacted him as a man, being vulnerable. And so what you do see is dueling narratives of what is a man, right? Is it brutality? Is it physical? Or is it also, too, a father who is also, too, impacted by reproductive rights, right? And family planning, which has been so left out of this conversation. The man has been so left out of this conversation of family planning and reproductive rights, but you saw that man being vulnerable on that stage about what it feels like for him. And so you saw a man being emotional, being vulnerable, but also too supporting his partner, his wife, in their difficult time that they had with the reproductive challenges. And so there is not only dueling surrogates between the RNC, the Republicans and Democrats, Harris and Trump, but you also too have dueling narratives, right? And I think that is a question that voters are going to have to ask themselves as they make their decisions is what is this perception of man, right? And how do we see it, right? And how is that going to be redefined? This is about choice when it comes to that.
Yeah,
very intentional.
You'll hear a lot of surrogates for the Harris campaign saying that, as you say, vulnerability does not equal weakness. Certainly not in anybody, but specifically men. Mike, stay with me for a minute. I want to bring Zareen Shah back into the conversation because, Zareen, what we're looking at here is a packed crowd. Crowd size is something that the former president has talked about since he, came down the escalator. It's very important to him. He comes back to it all the time. This is a pretty big crowd. This is 30,000 people packed into arena. And one could argue many of them are there to see Beyonce or Jessica Alba or Willie Nelson or any of the other celebrities that came out. But Kamala Harris is there as well, and this is for her and her campaign. Talk to me about what her campaign is saying about the size of this crowd and the energy in it.
They are really touting the fact, Phil, that there's 30,000 people in this crowd. I mean, they're very excited about it. They're saying it's her biggest rally yet to date. And you brought up a good point, that this is something that Donald Trump cares very, very deeply about, his crowd size, right? But it also goes to the point, I mean, Phil, what have you heard over and over and over again the last few weeks, that this election is so close, that it's, practically tied. Every little vote is going to matter, right? And so when you have an arena packed with 30,000 people, and you think about elections like 2016, when Hillary Clinton lost by 70,000 votes between 3 states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, those are really big numbers. And you heard Mike Muse talk about that earned media in places like Texas, how you're going to have so much local media, national media, of course, talking about this very thing. 30,000 people packed in, the Beyonce aspect, Jessica Alba going up, talking about, she would talk about reproductive rights. She talked about her Mexican-American past, her Latina background. Willie Nelson also up there. And it goes to the point of what Mike Muse said about Donald Trump going to a place like New York, right? Similar to Texas in that is not going to be an issue. Those states will not be battleground states this election. But Donald Trump will get a lot of earned media in a place like Madison Square Garden, where he'll be speaking in New York. And then again, the issue in Texas, it is a great place for someone like Harris to talk about reproductive rights. That's what we've been talking about for the last little bit, right? Where there's a near total abortion ban in Texas. She's talked about how Trump appointed 3 Supreme Court justices who overturned Roe. That is something that Trump brags about. She's linking that idea of reproductive rights with freedom of a woman's body, freedom to choose. And then, of course, Houston is Beyonce's hometown. So you have that huge crowd coming out, yes, for her, but also the Harris campaign as well in this moment.
Think about an eclectic group of celebrities: Jessica Alba, Beyonce, and Willie Nelson. You see this at least a lot on the Democrat side of these elections. Traditionally, Hollywood comes out for Democrat candidates. Zohreen, I'm curious, does the Trump campaign, in your estimation, care much about this kind of thing? And is that because, you know, they don't get celebrities like this coming out for them, like Beyonce and Taylor Swift? Or do they not care so much because they just don't think it matters?
It's so hard to know. I mean, look, you heard Donald Trump kind of complain about this, right? Or talk about the fact he doesn't need it. In 2016, he actually mentioned Beyonce by name and Jay-Z, and the fact he didn't need those celebrities. He mentioned Lady Gaga as well and others. But then you also have a lot of people who are Trump supporters who have said that that is the type of thing that turns them off, that they don't want Hollywood meddling in their elections, right? That Hollywood, places like Hollywood, D.C., those cities don't really understand them and their needs. And so even though Trump has sort of expressed this sort of maybe bitterness towards not having that, a lot of his supporters have expressed not wanting it.
Yeah, and for our viewers who are just, joining us, we are, of course, waiting for Beyonce to take the stage. Not in the Democratic convention sort of way. We know she's going to be here tonight. And this is in Houston, Texas, her hometown. That is a crowd of 30,000 people. Zohreen Shah is with me right now. And Zohreen, I think it bears repeating and talking to you about an event like this in deep red Texas. Is not necessarily meant to try to win the delegates there in Texas, as so much it is to broadcast this, all over the country and energize people who perhaps may be thinking about, I don't love either candidate, I'm just going to not vote, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, there is a virtually zero chance that Harris will win Texas. 40 electoral votes. It hasn't gone to the Democrats since 1976. But this is really about talking about the issues for her, about reproductive rights in Texas, and also about having Beyonce come out. I mean, Phil, you and I have talked about how Beyonce is massive. I mean, her Renaissance World Tour boosted the economy by, $4 billion? She has more Instagram followers than someone like Taylor Swift, well over 300 million. Mike Muse was talking about how you can bet probably between now and Election Day, there's going to be a very thoughtful Beyonce post urging people to get out and vote. She thinks about social media in a very strategic, thoughtful way. And you remember, when we were at the DNC, there was that rumor that Beyonce would be at the DNC, right? Democrats were so excited about it. They love Beyonce and of course, artists like Taylor Swift, as well as, look, there's a broad audience they have, right? But Democrats, especially the DNC, were excited about it. They didn't get it then. And they're activating these sort of artists, these sort of entertainers in this moment when the campaign thinks it perhaps really matters, when we're 10 days out from the election.
Yeah, they are hyping that crowd something fierce before Beyonce comes out. I'm going to tell you that right now. Zohreen, I'm curious. Last night we saw former President Obama and Bruce Springsteen on the same stage with Harris. Tonight, we're going to see Beyonce and Willie Nelson and Jessica Alba. We're talking about how celebrity endorsements might not be as big as some people would think they would be. But talk to me about momentum. These two events back to back, the biggest star power that the vice president can bring out is former President Obama and Beyonce. I mean, these are two huge stars, in politics and in music. What does this mean going into the weekend? As now we're counting in days, we're not counting in weeks. What does this mean going into the weekend, this kind of momentum?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely counting in days, right? But also, early voting has started in so many of these battleground states. This is an incredibly important time to activate these celebrities and a lot of these folks. But, as you were talking about Barack Obama and Bruce Springsteen, I couldn't help but think, oh, that's really an interesting way for her to perhaps target male voters, right? You have Barack Obama specifically talking to men. He specifically was talking to black men about how they perhaps maybe some of their biases keep them from voting for a woman. The boss certainly, can speak to maybe a target audience that someone like Beyonce or Jessica Alba maybe cannot. So I think it's interesting, especially when you see this gender gap between the two candidates. Trump is leading men by about 14 points. Harris is leading women by about 12 points. That is a huge gap, Phil. It's going to be really interesting to see in these last few days how they activate celebrities, how they use their events. This one in particular, it's going to be about reproductive rights. It has been. You had Jessica Alba talk about that when she spoke. Harris is expected to speak about that as well. Texas, of course, has a near total ban on abortion. So it'll be interesting to see how they approach those topics and how they activate these people in the last few days of this election.
Zareen, you have covered the vice president for a long time, many years, long before she was vice president. You talk about part of what she'll talk about tonight, obviously reproductive rights, but, political experts will tell you it's, these kind of campaigns are about more than just one issue, specifically the economy. So do you expect her to hit on that, or do you expect this to be a pretty focused rally on, focusing on reproductive rights, or will she touch on all the issues that matter to Americans?
Look, I'm sure she'll touch on everything, right? Every sort of event I've been to of hers, she touches on everything. And some of them just have more of a deeper focus on issues. When you saw the banner across that stage in Texas tonight, it said two specific things. It said, vote for reproductive rights, vote for freedom. So you can really bet that she's going to go hard on that topic in particular. But what's really interesting about reproductive rights as well, Phil, is that even before Roe was overturned, when I was covering Harris back in 2019, she was talking about abortion. She was going hard at it and about reproductive rights. That is an issue she's actually always talked about. In this moment, though, with Roe overturned, with the election just days away, she is going hard at it as well, in an especially deeper way. And I do think what's really interesting, too, about this very topic, she was actually asked about reproductive rights, and it ties into Texas in such an interesting way. She was asked about her specific plan just a few hours ago to expand reproductive rights if Congress does not agree to codify Roe. And she said, she specifically talked about the Senate candidate that you saw up on stage just a few minutes ago. She said, well, when Texas votes for Colin Allred for U.S. Senate, we will be in a position actually closer to being able to put back in place the protection of Roe. Look, of course, she was pressed on this. Okay, what if they don't have enough people in Congress to vote for that? She didn't express a real plan B in that case. But when she was pushed on it, she said, we will keep fighting. And our country, America, has a history of understanding. We don't give up the fight for freedom. So just the fact that she's been really pushing on this hard today, I think we can expect her to go very hard on it tonight as well.
Yeah, you mentioned Representative Allred. Huge boost, this kind of rally, 30,000 people. Beyonce wouldn't be happening in that down ballot election. So it's good to tie the two in for him if you're him in his race. I'm curious because, as I mentioned, you've covered the vice president for quite some time. This has been, a very quick campaign for her, like 100 days or something like that.
Yeah.
How have you seen her as a candidate grow just, in the last few months of taking the helm of this campaign? Because we saw her as a candidate years ago. We saw her as a presidential candidate years ago, and she was the first one out that year.
She wasn't the first one. I think Beto O'Rourke was actually the first one. He dropped a few weeks before she did. She dropped at December 3rd, and he dropped that sometime in November. But yeah, she was one of the first. And that was really surprising to people because when she came in, she had, 20,000 people in that rally in Oakland back in January. She had so much star power. She was considered a front runner and to possibly even maybe get the nomination that year. And she dropped out a full 2 months before the Iowa caucus. Look, there's been a big change in her, but I also feel like there's been a big change in how we see someone like her. Look, she's been vice president, the first female vice president for the last few years. That sort of perception that changes the way we understand a woman in power, right? And I think the biggest thing that's different about her now than 2019 is the sheer backing that she has. We see what someone like her is like when she has, quite frankly, all the money in the world, like $1 billion that she's raised just the last several weeks of being in this campaign, when she has all the support in the world, or at least from about roughly half the country, and when she has literally everything she needs. I mean, she has Barack Obama now campaigning for her. She didn't have any of that in 2019, Phil. Like, I remember being with her in Iowa at the end of November, a few days before she dropped out, and being with her in a room with like 20 people. people who had come to see her in Iowa. The polls were down for her. She had no money left, no support. It was dire. They were talking about primarying her in California, about Tom Steyer primarying her potentially in California, about her losing her Senate seat, let alone her being vice president or possibly leader of the free world back then, right? Those things fundamentally change you as a candidate when you have that kind of lack of support, and then when you have this. And yes, she's changed, but everything around her certainly did as well.
Right, and this sort of meeting the moment as well. I'm curious, and this sort of asks you to put on a political operative hat here, but while there might not be the tremendous value that a celebrity endorsement brings, like a Taylor Swift or Beyonce, while that may not translate into, 100 million votes, what is the risk about coming out against that person? In other words, will we see Donald Trump tonight go after Beyonce? Is that a big risk?
That's a good question. I mean, look, he's said a lot of things that's never really hurt him, right? He's come out against a lot of companies and celebrities, and it's never appeared to sort of change his numbers. I have no idea if he will tonight against Beyonce. Back in 2016, I mentioned he said something like, I don't need Jay-Z, I don't need Beyonce, don't need Lady Gaga. And that didn't seem to hurt him with his followers back then. But look, I do think you're right. It's not exactly going to translate to that many votes, right? But we do know that Beyonce certainly has a lot of people following her. Far more than Donald Trump or Kamala Harris on Instagram, by the way, right? Over 300,000 people. A lot of people will possibly be seeing anything that she posts tonight after her performance. And of course, a lot of the earned media that she gets after performing tonight.
Zorine, we are watching the former president tonight as well. He's 3 hours late to his own rally because he spent 3 hours with Joe Rogan on that podcast. And that's, very pointed as well. I want to ask you the same question. I want to talk with you and get your perspective on it. Mike and I were having this conversation about masculinity because that is a big conversation in this election. There's such a gender gap, such a gender divide in this election. We talk a lot about reproductive rights, which arguably affects both men and women. But there is this discussion about what is masculinity, and there is that brand of Hulk Hogan, as Mike was talking about, and Hulk Hogan and Joe Rogan, and that brand of masculinity. But that is not what Kamala Harris and her surrogates are saying is necessarily a real man.
It's so fascinating, this conversation about gender in politics, right? I mean, we have seen the role of men, Phil, just in the last few decades really change in this country. I mean, you look at places like Pennsylvania, and when you talk to men and women in states like that, I mean, there's women who talk about in the last few years feeling really empowered in the workforce, feeling really empowered at home. The dynamics have shifted in this country in the last few decades, especially after Hillary Clinton ran for president in 2016, when you have someone like Harris who can make it to the top, and you have a lot of men who, quite frankly, they are not, some of them, the breadwinners anymore of their family. Psychologically, that has done something when you talk to these folks in swing states that impacts how they vote. It shows you, I mean, when you just look at these margins, the dynamics of how far apart they are, it is really fascinating what is happening in this country with the sort of like the equality, right? The movement to have women rise to the top. It has created sort of what appears to be this rift. I think it's fascinating. And you see the numbers, right? Trump leading by 14 points with men, Harris leading by 12 points. I mean, if that proves to be true in this election, one of the biggest differences between how men and how women are voting for a particular candidate in an American election. And it's interesting to see how they're both approaching it as well. I mean, we're seeing it tonight with Harris. She's going hard on the women tonight. She's talking about reproductive rights. You're seeing those ads with her. You're seeing that woman that you mentioned who had health issues when it came to abortion speak and introduce someone in that rally just a few minutes ago. Jessica Alba up there, Beyonce up there, talking about Jessica Scalva talking about reproductive rights, right? This gender dynamic is something really interesting and something we should keep an eye on as we approach November 5th.
All right, Zareen, stay with me. I want to bring Mike Muse back in, and as I do, I want to let our viewers know that I'm getting the latest. As I said, Donald Trump is about 3 hours late to his rally. He posted a video on the Jumbotron there, people waiting for him in Michigan, saying, it's Friday night, I'm just going to spend some time with Joe Rogan. We're going to go a little longer. I really appreciate it. Some people, left because they're waiting for him, but that we're following that as well. In my head politically, I'm wondering if that has anything to do with the timing of Beyonce coming out, but that's just, Mike, that's me thinking. Talk to me a little bit about, out loud, talk to me a little bit about, Bruce Springsteen was on stage last night. Tonight, it's going to be Beyonce. It doesn't get much bigger, than those two. You throw Taylor Swift into the mix. She hasn't been there performing, but we're going to see both of those folks. How does celebrity, how does music play into politics?
I think it's interesting. I see where you're going with that around former President Trump issuing that statement, and I can't help think about political gamesmanship. It's no different than on election night. They're often waiting in terms of that political gamesmanship of, who is going to concede? Is anyone going to concede? Who goes out first, right? Who goes out second? Does someone go out before the final tally has been voted to declare victory or to declare that there is some momentum on their side? I have a feeling former President Trump is definitely following this Beyonce rally to figure out, one, how he's going to respond, and then two, what is the energy in the crowd like. Moving on to the question that you asked me, I think Bruce Springsteen plays a really interesting role in his endorsement and rally yesterday in Georgia. Not only the fact that it was not in Atlanta, but it was in the rural area of Georgia, I thought was very significant. And Phil, just as I put Eminem and Joe Rogan in conversation with each other, I'm actually going to put Bruce Springsteen and the former chief of staff, General Kelly, in conversation with Bruce Springsteen. Earlier this week, we heard the explosive interview of the New York Times where General Kelly said when he was with former President Trump, former President Trump does not know a lot about American history. He doesn't have the context of the history in order to look at the decisions that could be consequential to what he is thinking and what he's looking to do. In yesterday's remarks from Bruce Springsteen, he mentioned the reason why he's endorsing Harris and not and Trump. He invoked history. He invoked what it means to be American and this American idea of understanding history, understanding who we are as Americans. And there's no better place to do that in the South. And particularly when you think about Georgia, when you think about red states, you think about Southern culture, Southern heritage, right? There's all these things that rooted in patriotism ideally comes from the South. So the fact that he did it in Georgia, he did it in a rural area of Georgia, really invoking history, the importance of history, the importance of what it means to be an American in conversation with General Kelly discussing the fact that former President Trump does not have an understanding of history. I thought that was very significant. And in particular, in the song that he chose, he talked about this idea about the big wheels going through the fields and letting the light shine through. For me, that was very reminiscent of former President Ronald Reagan, when his famous quote where he says, "America is always the shiny city on the hill. We are always this light of democracy that is of and for the world." And so I think that for that moment to happen, for him to invoke that, then he also too talked about the train in his song. And he talked about on this train, there are winners and there's losers, but we're all on this train together. And so I think for Bruce Springsteen, that was important to double down on this notion of what it means to be an American, what it means to be together, and what it means to understand the fundamentals of history in order that we don't repeat the past, right? And that goes into, the decisions that former President Trump is looking at when it comes to the Department of Education. When you think about critical race theory, we're thinking about the type of books that should be selected, that our children should be reading in that movement. I think that gets to what Bruce Springsteen was talking about. So again, as you and I were talking about earlier, power of the narrative. How do you use celebrity endorsements and narratives in order to convey the message that you are trying to go forward with, and particularly celebrity endorsements?
Yeah. This train, there are saints and sinners. This train, there are losers and winners. Mike Muse quoting Land of Hope and Dreams. It was important that he played that song. And as big a Beyonce fan as you are, I am a Springsteen fan. And I can tell you that over the years, it has been discussed, is it a good idea for these massive celebrities, not even celebrities, musicians who have a fan base that are going to be from different sides of the aisle? is it prudent for them to come out and speak their truth, their political truth? And someone like Bruce Springsteen, someone like Beyonce, someone like Taylor Swift have done that for quite some time. Bruce has done it for the majority of his career, and he's been on the winning side and the losing side of that. Mike, I want to point out just quickly as we're talking, this is Andrea Cummings. She needed to get a medical abortion, and she wasn't able to. I believe she's the woman from the ad that we have been seeing play on the screen there. But this is a very powerful a moment for this particular rally as reproductive rights is being zeroed in on. But again, we saw, former President Trump come out and say, oh, I don't need Taylor Swift. I used to like her or something of that nature. So he very well may do that about Beyonce. I'm wondering if you think that's a smart idea. I mean, Zohreen points out that nothing he really says has sort of consequences with his base, at least. But, is that a good idea when there are people out there who might be thinking about voting for him?
Your question, I think our dialogue is always about conversation, so I'm going to do both. I'm going to address Amber speaking right now, and I'm also, too, going to pick up your question that you have. What's interesting about this, about Amber speaking about the challenge that she's had with reproductive challenges in relation to her health, goes to this issue that you were having with Zerlene and what America seems to be having. And I was listening to the press conference of Vice President Harris today, where the reporter asked, should she be using these closing final days to focus on reproductive rights and issues where some voters may care about the economy? Well, Phil, as I move about the cabin, which is the country and which is the world, I come across so many people who are about single issue voting. People, and I do see Mama just Tina Knowles right now, for those who may not be aware, as we're watching, that is Tina Knowles, that is the mother of Beyonce. And so I am sure, Phil, that is a signal that Beyonce should be coming up close, if not the next person that Tina Knowles will be introducing. But until that moment, until we're doing cutaways, to continue with the line of thinking is that there's so many Americans who are single issue voters who are going to election to the voting booths on the purpose of freedom, going for the purpose of democracy, the economy, and home ownership.
All right, Mike, as you point out, Tina Knowles, Beyonce's mom, I don't think there's anyone better to introduce a star like that. Let's listen to her.
Thank you, Andrea, for courageously sharing your story. I am honored to be back in Houston tonight, the city where my girls got their voices. I've been so blessed in my life to have many careers, many black jobs. But I have said before, the best job that I've ever had is being a mother. I've had the privilege of raising and helping to raise 4 daughters. And I also take immense pride in being Mama Tina to so many young women and men. It has been empowering for me. You know, the teleprompter, I'm having a hard time seeing it, guys. I'm just being real here. So it's been powerful to encourage young people and to be there for them as well as my own children. You know, I have always believed that I was raising my girls in a world that with every passing generation was becoming freer for women. With more opportunity for women, a healthier and safer existence for women. And so we cannot accept a country where our daughters and former generations and future granddaughters will no longer have the basic freedom that I have lived with for most of my life. And generations before us did. We will fight for our freedom. Yes. And as I look behind, I also know in order to move forward, we must move with purpose. So I say a prayer that is infused with the strength, faith, and courage of those who came before us. We cannot go backwards, guys. Too many people have died for us to have our freedom. I know in my soul that all those past moments have led us to a time like this. We've got to show up and do our part. And that is why I am here. I am so honored to be here in support of Kamala Harris. And I am also so proud to be here with two of my daughters. Please welcome Kelly and Beyonce.
Charlie, how your angels get down like that? Girl, I didn't know you could get down like that. Charlie, how your angels get down like that? Tell me how you feel about this.
Welcome to my Houston family. I am so proud to be here back in Houston with my mama T and my sister. Welcome to this day, this remarkable, this joyous day. A date, a day, a time, a moment with weight and meaning for our country, for our people, and for the world. A moment, Houston, where we grab back the pen from those who are trying to write an American story of division and hatred. A moment when we grab back the pen from those who are trying to write an American story of misogyny and racism. We are grabbing back the pen from those who are trying to write an American story that would deny the right for women to make our own decisions about our bodies. Houston, we are grabbing back the pen. We are grabbing back the pen, that pen, to forge a new path with Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. We are grabbing back the pen to write a new American story, a story of community, of equality, strength, of kindness, and of hope. When I was a little girl and I pledged allegiance to the United States of America, that meant something to me. That flag meant something to me. And today, that means grabbing that pen and casting my vote, as I already did 2 days ago, for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. Now, Houston, you've already had a hand in creating destiny. So do what you do and do this thing again. H-Town. We are so happy to be standing here on this stage as proud country Texas women, supporting and celebrating the one and only Vice President Kamala Harris. A woman who's been pushing for what this country really needs right now. Unity. It's impossible not to feel the energy in this room, the positivity, the community, the humanity. We are at the precipice of an incredible shift, the brink of history. I'm not here as a celebrity. I'm not here as a politician. I'm here as a mother. A mother who cares deeply about the world my children and all of our children live in. A world where we have the freedom to control our bodies. A world where we're not divided. Our past, our present, our future merge to meet us here. Imagine our daughters growing up seeing what's possible with no ceilings, no limitations. Imagine our grandmothers. Imagine what they feel right now. Those who have lived to see this historic day. Even those who are no longer physically with us. Imagine all of their sacrifice. The sacrifices made so we can witness the strength of a woman. Standing in her power. Reimagining what leadership is. For all the men and women in this room and watching around the country, we need you. Your voice has power and magnitude. Your vote is one of the most valuable tools, and we need you. Your freedom is your God-given right, your human right. Everybody say Texas. Texas plays a pivotal role to change the course of our future. Texans and Houstonians from 3rd Ward, River Oaks, Sugar Land, 5th Ward, Ailey, Memorial, Southwest Side, North Side, all the way down to Most City. We all have a role to play to make this a reality. We're all part of something much bigger. We must vote. And we need you. It's time to sing a new song. A song that began 248 years ago. The old notes of downfall, discord, despair no longer resonate. Our generations of loved ones before us are whispering a prophecy, a quest, a calling, an anthem. Our moment right now, it's time for America to sing a new song. Our voices sing a chorus of unity. They sing a song of dignity and opportunity. Are y'all ready to add your voice to the new American song? Because I am. So let's do this, ladies and gentlemen. Please give a big, loud Texas welcome to the next President of the United States, Vice President Kamala Harris.
I can't move. Freedom, cut me loose. Yeah, freedom, freedom, where are you? 'Cause I need freedom too. I break chains all by myself. Won't let my freedom rot in hell. Hey, I'ma keep on running 'cause the winner don't quit on themselves. I'ma wade through the waters till the tide don't move
everybody. Thank you for being here this evening. Can we hear it for Miss Tina Knowles? For Miss Kelly? And Beyonce? What a warm Texas welcome. I thank you all so very much. And I thank you. And I thank my friends for reminding us of exactly what we are fighting for in this campaign. We are fighting for freedom. 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 And to Andrea and everyone here tonight whose lives have been impacted by these Trump abortion bans in this moment, I thank you for sharing your stories and for your courage. It is an honor to be here with so many leaders and all of you who have taken the time out of your busy lives to be here this evening so we can, as a community of people, as people who love our country, be clear, sound strong, and stand in favor of the freedom of every woman to make decisions about her own body. I also want to thank the members of Congress who are here, including Colin Allred. I'm counting on you to send him to the United States Senate so we can get right to work. And to all the elected officials and community leaders, I thank you all. I thank you. See you later. See you later. It's okay. See? We're not going back. And we have a lot of work to do. And we have a lot of work to do, and we will not get distracted. We will not get distracted. So listen, Texas, we have 11 days left in one of the most consequential elections of our lifetime. Voting has already started, and we know this will be a tight race until the very end. Okay. So here's the thing. Okay, so we got work to do. We got work to do. We got work to do. And I love that there is so much enthusiasm. But let's talk about the work we've got to do. Okay. Because we've got 11 days to see this through, and we will win. We will win. We will win. And we will win, and we will win because we know and understand what is at stake. We are 11 days out from an election that will decide the future of America, including the freedom of every woman to make decisions about her own body and her reproductive freedom. And everyone here tonight is here because we are about fighting for our future and not letting some people take us back. Because we are not going back. We are not going back. We are not going back. And in America, we know freedom is not to be given. It is not to be built. bestowed. It is ours by right, and we are prepared to fight for it. Because we understand the stakes, and moving forward, we understand that what we must do, Texas, is right here. You who are ground zero in the fight for reproductive freedom, we must be loud, we must organize, we must mobilize, we must energize the people. Because you all know, Texas is home to one of the most restrictive abortion bans in our country. In Texas, abortion is banned from the moment of conception. You know what? Just send them to that small rally down the street. It'll be fine. Some people don't have a great sense of direction, but that's okay. We'll show them the way. We'll show them the way. Because we know what's at stake, and we will not be silenced. We know what's happening here in Texas. Doctors and nurses could go to prison for life simply for providing reproductive care. Think about that. Life in prison for health care providers for doing what they think is in their patients' best interests. You know what? The beauty of our campaign is we're fighting for democracy. And what we know here in Texas is that there are some who would distract from the fact that Texas has a law now that offers a cash bounty for turning in someone who merely helps a friend or a family member get the care they need. In Texas, the law provides for prison for life for health care providers for doing what they believe is in the best interest of their patient. In some counties in Texas, they have passed travel bans to prevent women from going to other states to receive care. These are the stakes. And we know how we got here. When Donald Trump was president, he hand-selected 3 members of the United States Supreme Court with the intention that they would undo the protections of Roe v. Wade. And as he intended, they did. And now more than 20 states have a Trump abortion ban. Now 1 in 3 American women lives in a state with a Trump abortion ban, including Texas and every state in the South except for Virginia. And many of these bans are causing care to be denied until a woman is at death's door. Many have no exceptions even for rape and incest, which is immoral. And let us agree, one does not have to abandon their faith or deeply held beliefs to agree the government should not be telling her what to do with her body. Not the government. If she chooses, she will talk with her priest, her pastor, her rabbi, her imam, but not the government and some people up in the state legislature telling her what's in her best interest when she knows what's in her own best interest. And let us recognize these same people, check this out, these same people who have argued that these Trump abortion bans are in the best interest of women and children, do look at their records. They tend to be in states with the highest rate of maternal mortality in the country. For decades, these extremist leaders who have neglected prenatal care, maternity care, and postpartum care, and who now, after continuously failing to support women and children, claim to care about women and children. Well, I have a question for them. Where you been? Where you been? Where you been when it comes to prioritizing care for women and children? have you been when it comes to helping pregnant women and new mothers? Where have you been when it comes to affordable child care? And do note, many of these same extremist leaders have also refused to extend the child tax credit, which lifted half of America's children out of poverty. They, who have blocked proposals to lower child care costs for working parents, they who have tried to cut WIC and SNAP for low-income mothers and their children. The hypocrisy abounds. And here's what else is happening. These bans are driving doctors out of states like Texas, Idaho, Georgia, and North Carolina, leaving women who are already living in maternity care deserts, meaning there is no maternity care anywhere near them, leaving them with even fewer options. And since Trump abortion bans, fewer medical students are choosing to specialize in women's health. Over these past 2 years, the impact of Trump abortion bans has been devastating. We see the horrific reality that women and families face every single day, and the stories are vivid, they are difficult to hear, they are difficult to tell. For example, here in Texas, can we roll the tape?
4 years they were trying to get Roe v. Wade terminated, and I did it.
As someone who watched his wife almost bleed to death because of conservative implemented laws.
I had to fight and beg to get care that I needed.
Because I wasn't permitted to have an abortion, I nearly died on their watch.
If I had not been able to go out of state to get an abortion in Colorado, my happy, healthy son, Henry, would not be here today.
They took 2 liters of infected fluid from my abdomen, and the infection was so severe that I almost died.
I was to stay pregnant and deliver a baby that would suffocate in my arms.
When the Roe v. Wade, I did a great thing.
From his own mouth, a great thing. There is nothing great about what happened to women like Kate Cox, who was heartbroken to learn her much-wanted pregnancy was not viable, heartbroken when her doctors told her if she remained pregnant, she would be risking her own life or her ability to have children in the future. But the Attorney General of Texas threatened if Kate's doctors helped terminate her pregnancy, they would be criminally prosecuted. So Kate was forced to flee the state to get the care she needed. In Louisiana, Caitlin Joshua was turned away from not 1, but 2 emergency rooms while miscarrying. She was bleeding. She was in pain. But because of a Trump abortion ban, doctors would not treat her. Because if they did, they would have faced 15 years in prison. And so Caitlin had to go home where she went through the pain of a miscarriage for more than a month, and trying the whole time to hide her pain from her 4-year-old daughter. We know that women have died because of Trump abortion bans. Here today is Shanette Williams, the mother of Amber Nicole Thurman, a vibrant, we must speak her name, Amber Nicole Thurman. I promised her mother I would speak her name. A vibrant 28-year-old mother of a 6-year-old son who died a preventable death because of Georgia's abortion ban. Now, Shanette and her family are courageously sharing Amber's story to make sure we all remember her as more than a statistic, so that we remember Amber was a daughter, a sister, a mother, and that she was loved, and that she should be alive today. And listen, we're all here because we know the reality is for every story we hear about the suffering because of a Trump abortion ban, there are so many stories we've never heard. An untold number of women and the people who love them who are silently suffering. Women who are being made to feel as though they did something wrong, as though they are criminals, as though they are alone. And to those women I say, and I think I speak on behalf of all of us, we see you and we are here with you. Texas, what is happening across this state and our country is a health care crisis. And Donald Trump is the architect of it. He brags about overturning Roe v. Wade. In his own words, quote, "I did it and I'm proud to have done it." That's what he says. And one has to ask, proud that women are dying? Proud that doctors and nurses could be thrown in prison for life for administering life-saving care? Proud that young women in America today have fewer rights than their mothers and grandmothers? How dare he? Donald Trump even said everyone wanted Roe v. Wade to be overturned. Well, a woman in Ohio was arrested and charged after having a miscarriage. So was a woman in South Carolina. They didn't want this. Hadley Duvall, who became pregnant after being raped by her stepfather when she was 12 years old. She didn't want this. Ryan Hamilton, who is here tonight, his wife was denied treatment at the hospital for a miscarriage. They got home. He found her bleeding and unconscious. He dressed her, put her in a car, packed up their 9-month-old child, and drove to a different emergency room where doctors told them she could have died. Ryan didn't want this. Let's be clear. And the men across America, this needs to be said, men across America do not want to see their daughters and wives and sisters and mothers put at risk because their rights have been taken. I see the men here, and I thank you. The men of America don't want this. And now the Attorney General of Texas is suing the United States government so that Texas prosecutors can check this out, so that Texas prosecutors can get their hands on private medical records of women who leave the state to get care. Now, I'd ask everybody here, please do see the irony. Okay, listen to this. On the one hand, Donald Trump won't let anyone see his medical records. I gave up mine. And on the other hand, they want to get their hands on your medical records. Simply put, they are out of their mind. In just 4 years as president, Donald Trump was able to erase half a century of hard-fought progress for women. And now he wants to go even further. He will force all 50 states to track and report on women's miscarriages and abortions and go after access to contraception and IVF treatment. It's right there in his Project 2025. Google it. And let us be clear, if Donald Trump wins again, he will ban abortion nationwide. And though we are in Texas tonight, I say it to the folks who might be watching from home, for anyone watching from another state, know this. If you think you are protected from Trump abortion bans because you live in Michigan or Pennsylvania or Nevada or New York or California, or any state where voters or legislators have protected reproductive freedom, please know No one is protected if there is a Trump national abortion ban, and it will outlaw abortion in every single state. Understand that. And he can do it with or without an act of Congress. All that to say, elections matter. Elections matter. If Donald Trump is president again, he will likely get to appoint at least one additional Supreme Court justice. Remember who we appointed. Call her Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. But if he were reelected, he'd probably get to appoint one, if not two, members to the United States Supreme Court, at which point Donald Trump will have packed the court with 5 out of 9 justices on that court who will sit, but think about that, who will sit for lifetime appointments, shaping your lives and the lives of generations to come. And that is among the many critical contrasts in this election. Look, Donald Trump doesn't trust women, but I do. We trust women, and we understand what's at stake. And with Colin Allred in the United States Senate, when Congress passes a bill to restore reproductive freedom, I will proudly sign it into law as President of the United States. Proudly. Proudly. So to all the friends here, let us remember, momentum is on our side. I know sometimes in Texas, folks are like, is it worth it? Does it make a difference? Yes, it does. You are making a difference, and momentum is on our side. You are making a difference. Since Roe was overturned, every time reproductive freedom has been on the ballot, from Kansas to California to Kentucky, in Michigan, Montana, Vermont, and Ohio, the people of America have voted for freedom every time it's been on the ballot. And often they have voted by overwhelming margins from so-called red to so-called blue states, proving this is not a partisan issue. Because Americans from all backgrounds and beliefs understand the decision of whether, when, and how to build a family is one of the most consequential decisions anyone can make. And we are fighting for an America where no matter who you are, where you live, you can make decisions about your own body for yourself. So moving forward, all of this is to say, reproductive freedom is on the ballot in this presidential election. And in 10 states around the country, including Arizona, Florida, and Nevada. And with the work of everyone here, freedom will win. Freedom will win. And so I want to take a moment to speak in particular to all the young leaders here and across America. Do we have anybody here from Gen Z? Experience, and I see you, and I see your power. I see your power. And I know so many of you are voting for the first time. Can I see a raise of hands? Can we applaud our leaders who are voting for the first time? All right, we That's right. So listen, to everyone here, we know freedom has never come easy. Never come easy. There has been no moment of our progress as a country that did not come about without a fight. Let's all be clear about that. And we are in the midst of a movement. And everyone here is a leader in that movement. So we do this then remembering those who came before us, those who struggled and sacrificed for our freedoms, who found fellowship and even joy in one another in the fight. They found strength and hope in fighting for our ideals. And that is what we are doing. That is what we are doing because we know weeping may endure for a night, but joy cometh in the morning. So Texas, election day is in 11 days. Early voting has already begun. So now it is time to start making your plan. Go to iwillvote.com to get all the information you need. And it is not only the presidency that is on the ballot. There are many important races, including Colin Aldred running for Senate, who we must note his opponent supported a national abortion ban 6 times. An opponent who said he does not support exceptions even for victims of rape and incest. So let's remember, Texas, your vote is your voice, and your voice is your power. So today I ask you, are you ready to make your voices heard? Do we trust women? Do we believe in reproductive freedom? Do we believe in the promise of America? And are we ready to fight for it? And when we fight, we win. God bless you and God bless America.
All right, there it is. We waited for quite some time this evening, but we finally saw Beyonce, who also came out with Kelly Rowland right after Beyonce's mom, Tina Knowles. And there goes Vice President Harris after speaking for about 20, 25 minutes, I think, if you guys can check me on that. I want to bring in Zareen Shah now. And Zareen, we were talking before this about the importance of Texas and what this means. And you were right, it was very clear. She was in Texas, but she was speaking to the rest of the country. And there must be internal research in the Harris campaign that reproductive rights is going to be on the ballot. She just said it's on the ballot in all these different states. It's on the ballot this time. I didn't hear her talk about any other issues. This was a very focused speech. She went to Texas to do this. She says it's the epicenter of reproductive rights, and she delivered that speech to the country.
It was one heck of a speech, Phil. I mean, I'm trying to think about all the past speeches I've heard from her, and I'm wondering if this is perhaps one of her best. And you're right, she really focused on abortion. We were talking about before this, would she focus on other things, the economy or immigration or whatever it was? No, she focused on this issue. And you're right, there must be something showing her just talk about the thing that you're strong, speaking about, the things that people want to hear directly from you, the thing that maybe moves the dial. She really went hard on this for a while. I mean, she talked about also momentum being on her side. I thought that was a really interesting quote because there's a lot of Democrats right now who are panicking, who don't feel momentum is on their side. But she went on this for several minutes. She talked about of Donald Trump possibly winning, the likeliness of possibly appointing another Supreme Court judge, maybe a second one, to even make this possibly a national ban. She's talked about battleground states in relation to this very issue. Michigan, Pennsylvania. She even talked about California. She said, don't think that you're an exception, right? If Trump, she says, were in office, she says that he would make abortion a national ban. She rolled tape of Trump talking about abortion, bragging about overturning Roe. And then she rolled tape about women talking about it, which was incredibly powerful. And then I think one of her most powerful lines, actually, is when she talked about the Attorney General of Texas suing the government to get their hands on medical records of women leaving the state for care. And that's when she brings in Donald Trump. She says he hasn't even released his medical records, and I have. Then she says, quote, simply put, they are out of their minds. I mean, this was a searing speech, Phil, very, very powerful, and again, just focused on one topic, on abortion.
Yeah, really nice moment you're seeing here. Kamala Harris, the vice president, talking to that little girl, gave her a huge smile when she came by her. Something else that I picked up, Zorine, Gen Z. She spoke directly to Gen Z, and the quote was, I'm counting on you because I know you are impatient for change.
I heard that too.
And that was, you know, that's really important because we were talking about young people voting, specifically young men.
The male part was interesting, too, and you probably caught that as well, Phil. She talked about the men in that stadium. She said men don't want to see their daughters, their wives, their sisters at risk. She said, I see the men here. I see you. Thank you. And to our very point that we were talking about earlier about that gender gap, clearly she knows that's an issue. Her campaign knows that's an issue where she is lagging, 14 points behind Donald Trump when it comes to men. She's up when it comes to women. I mean, that is her strength, 12 points. But that is a area where she's struggling with when it comes to men. And she directly made a plea for them and called them out in that speech over there.
All right, Zorine, thanks so much. I want to bring in Mike Muse. Mike, I can't imagine what you were thinking when you were watching Beyonce, because I want to talk about Beyonce. Zorine and I just talked about the vice president's speech. Kelly Rowland, who I believe I know you know, came out with Beyonce. They both spoke passionately. Great surrogates for the vice president. Your thoughts on what just happened?
Yeah, before I get to Kelly and Beyonce, I think there were some other standout moments of that speech. In particular, as you and I, before we tossed it to Tina Knowles, we were discussing that everyone has been talking about, can you talk about more than just reproductive rights and about abortion? And I have always said that a president has to be able to talk and chew gum at the same time. What we saw in Vice President Harris' speech right there was not only the nimbleness of her ability to adjust the protesters who were discussing in a way to tie it back to what she was saying and said, this is a fight for democracy, but what she did was did this really interesting nuance of tying in reproductive rights to the economy, in particular in the line when she was discussing the idea where she says, thinking about the wholeness of the woman, the wholeness of the child, right? What happens to the child once we're born? Those who are opposing reproductive rights have not been in the fights, in particular, not supporting the Affordable Care Act, voting against extending child care credits, and also cutting back programs and to defund WIC and SNAP. And I thought that was a very important moment. Another important moment I thought stood out to me for the first time I heard it was saying that people in medical school are opting out of specializing in women's health because they don't see a path that is both legal and could be economically financially prudent for them. Moving on, I thought that was a very key standout moment. I know we're short for time, but moving on to Kelly and Beyonce. Kelly Rowland is a friend. What I felt so good about seeing Kelly Rowland out there is that Kelly Rowland has had a voice in politics for a very long time. She's had a strong interest in it. And so it was really great to see her use that voice and to exercise it in a very public way for the first time. I think seeing Kelly Rowland out there will give other celebrities the permission structure that's needed to exercise their vote. Beyonce coming out, energizing, and really leaning into the culture that is Houston and calling out the different wards of it. She said something really powerful. She talked about the generational dynamic of loved ones before us. In her song, she says, ancestors on the wall, let the ghosts chit chat. So she's always been leaning into ancestral and generational dynamics, and she's really talked about the women that have gone before them who are looking at them as the ancestors and looking at the time is now for the women to possibly make history. All powerful from policy discussions and policy for those two to be the surrogates at this time in this critical moment.
Yeah, it's a great word, powerful. It was very powerful, and it comes on the heels of former President Obama and Bruce Springsteen the night before. Hard not to feel like you have momentum if you are in the Harris camp, at least this evening. Mike Muse, thank you so much. Always a pleasure to talk through any subject with you. Zoreen Shah as well. And thank you all so much for being with us. That's our show for this hour. I'm Phil Lipoff. Stay with ABC News Live for more context and analysis of the day's top stories. And, of course, breaking news. Thanks for streaming with us.
Wednesday night.
Oh my God.
We're back. The biggest and best season yet. Oh,